yeah. I don't believe in destiny, I just do what's best for me. Don't listen to my enemies, they're just full of jealousy. Yeah, this legacy, you gon' see what's left of me. You gon' see success in me, you ain't seen the rest of me. I just wanna be the best at what I know, better than the rest, just watch me grow. Put me to the test and watch me go. This is my quest, I'ma make it known. They call me obsessive, oh I know. Call me selective with my notes, call me aggressive with my flow. Call me offensive even though Joe, I ain't gonna lie, life's tough. Try to get by, life's rough. Try to do it right, it's not enough. Even though you try, you still mess up. But I'm still gonna fight for what I love. Still gonna die for what I love. Still gonna try, I won't give up. Still gonna fight until I've won. They say I'm way too obsessed and I've got nothing left. And I'm not quite there yet, but those words they'll regret. Cause I've got something left and I'm not giving in. I will not let them win. I won't stop till the end, no. Studied them religiously so I don't repeat history. And people won't admit to me they don't want a victory bad enough to get a C. They'd rather just go leave it be. And oh, this journey I've been on since 13, working hard and learning, never stopping searching. Yeah, it's burning, all this passion hurts me. I took action working, writing down these words. No, I'm not okay, I just wanna be something. I don't wanna be nothing, living all alone. No, I'm not alright, I'm just barely getting right. But I'll tell you I'm just fine, so you leave me alone. They say I'm way too obsessed and I've got nothing left. And I'm not quite there yet, but those words they'll regret. Cause I've got something left and I'm not giving in. I will not let them win, I won't stop till the end, no.
And I'm fucking livid that we are stuck in the timeline where Alex Jones is right. As I said, democracy is a system that reinforces authoritarian ideals.
Why aren't the Amish afraid of COVID? Because they don't have TVs.
They were posting some crazy shit like months ago. Remember that?
You brought a freaking guillotine.
I did.
Being a victim of a tragedy doesn't make you an expert in public policy. Somebody telling them to stand up for their rights is disinformation. Kind of works.
Oh no! Oh, okay, no.
You want to make the world a better place? Have some babies and raise them to not be stupid.
Man, governments are not going to like this shit.
Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, activists, and people of the internet, thank you for joining another episode of O'Donnell for Liberty. As always, I'm your host, Justin. Tonight, we got a special new segment, and moving forward, the O'Donnell for Liberty podcast, R&R, will review and react live, exclusively available here on YouTube and the next day on Odyssey. This program is only for our video subscribers, but you can continue to get our episodic interview series on Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and anywhere you listen to your favorite podcasts. And before we get started, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button, turn on notifications, and keep up to date with future shows. And if you enjoy what we're doing, you can be an early supporter of the program by following that Patreon link and signing up to join our production team. If you want to keep in touch between shows, follow me on social media, join our community Discord channel, and you can chat with other friends at any time. All those links are in the description as well. And first and foremost, I want to give a shout out to SneckSwag.com, where you can get all your favorite Liberty merch, including some awesome designs to showcase what you hate about COVID propaganda and how you survived COVID-19 84. Make Orwell fiction again, and that's just going to touch a tiny bit on what we're talking about here tonight. Now, tonight we're going to be reviewing and reacting to a scholarly article with the title COVID-19 and the Political Economy of Mass Hysteria, currently available by the National Institute of Health website and linked in the description below if you guys want to read along. That said, there is a very real chance that this video will enrage the censors and get this channel nuked. So in the description, you're going to see a link for my new landing website that has redirects to all the other platforms you can find this show on where you can follow us. I want you to take a minute, follow through that, and subscribe on Odyssey, where our video will be backed up in case Facebook and YouTube decide that this content is too objectionable. So we're going to take questions. So make sure you hit that like button, leave some comments, tell us what you think in the chat. At some point, Bill Barger is going to join in tonight. He's the one who sent me this article to read today. But in the meantime, let me bring up what we're talking about. So for those of you who might not have seen, I kind of put it pretty widespread on Twitter this morning, but the National Institute of Health has published this article entitled COVID-19 and the Political Economy of Mass Hysteria. Now, the National Institute of Health does have a habit of just publishing whatever people do submit to them that's peer-reviewed and makes it through their process, which means this has gone through the peer review process, it's gone through scholarly vetting, and people, it's published on a government website. It says .gov. That means you have to trust it, right? And it's actually published back in February of this year, and it didn't get any traction. Nobody reported on it, and it's wild how it's just come out recently. So let's zoom in. And I didn't read this. When Bill sent me this morning, I read the abstract and decided to stop. I want to give you guys my live reaction as I read through this because it just seems fascinating. And so we're going to go line by line. I'm going to read you guys this article. And like I said, it is linked in the description of this YouTube video. If you want to read along, you can follow that as long as the federal government hasn't taken it off their website yet, NIH. So the abstract. In this article, we aim to develop a political economy of mass hysteria. Using the background of COVID-19, we study past mass hysteria. Negative information, which is spread through mass media repetitively, can affect public health negatively in the form of nocebo effects and mass hysteria. We argue that mass and digital media in connection with the state may have adverse consequences during the COVID-19 crisis. Right there, they're saying that media and the state are what's going to have adverse consequences. Now, we all know, like, the very nature of a pandemic, but COVID-19 being a pandemic and a disease, it's likely to have issues. People are going to die. People are going to get sick. But is it possible that the state made things worse? I know I thought that from the beginning. I know a lot of you thought that from the beginning. Who knew that people who did research for the government thought that at the beginning as well? The resulting collective hysteria may have contributed to policy errors by governments not in line with health recommendations. While mass hysteria can occur in societies with a minimal state, we show that there exist certain self-corrective mechanisms and limits to the harm inflicted, such as sacrosanct private property rights. However, mass hysteria can be exacerbated and self-reinforcing when the negative information comes from an authoritative source, when the media are politicized and social networks make the negative information omnipresent. We conclude that the negative long-term effects of mass hysteria are exacerbated by the size of the state. We conclude that the negative long-term effects of mass hysteria are exacerbated by the size of the state. Who would have thought that it'd be the size of the state that was problematic? Who would have thought that it'd be the size of the state that made things worse? Oh, I know. Libertarians, anarchists, minarchists, mutualists, agorists, people who've been preaching for decades about the size of the state being the issue with most problems that we face. Introduction. Public healthcare systems form a vital part of the welfare state. Indeed, it is generally taken for granted that one main purpose of the modern welfare state is to improve public health. It is supposed to be the state that positively contributes to public health. In this article, we question this narrative in relation to the phenomenon of mass hysteria. We analyze how the modern state influences the development and extension of mass hysteria, arguing that the state exacerbates this phenomenon with adverse consequences for public health. By developing a political economy of mass hysteria, we fill an apparent gap in the literature. I'll pause right there. Public healthcare systems form a vital part of the welfare state. I'm going to disagree with that just on the premise that there is any such thing as a vital part of a welfare state, because the welfare state shouldn't be vital. We can all look at the state that we live in today with overreaching and overarching government control and government intrusion on your everyday life and wonder, like, how many of your problems that the welfare state solves were caused by the welfare state to begin with? How many people are impoverished and in poverty today because the welfare state put them there? How many people were wildly unable to make ends meet because the welfare state took such a percentage of their income or regulated them out of work? So I will contest that public healthcare systems form a vital part of the welfare state, because no public systems form the vital part of any state. Continuing, there have been many illuminating studies on psychological issues related to the phenomena of mass hysteria. As a consequence of the COVID-19 crisis, there have been several studies examining the adverse psychological effects of state-imposed lockdowns. I predicted this 18 months ago when the first lockdown came. I predicted it, and I got put in timeout by Facebook and Twitter for 24 hours for hyperbolized fake news or spreading fear. They said it was like hate speech or something, because I said lockdowns were going to negatively affect mental health of every generation. And I predicted we'd see a huge spike in suicides when the numbers were reported because of the state-imposed lockdowns and telling people they weren't allowed to engage with their friends, their family, their coworkers, their day-to-day lives that they had grown dependent on. There are also studies that examine the contribution of digital media and the internet to anxiety, emotional contagion, anxiety transmissions, and nocebo effects. I don't even know what a nocebo effect is. I don't feel like I really need to look it up at this point, because everything else on there, the internet contributes to anxiety. Now, I'm not going to say log off and end the video here. We're going to wait till YouTube kicks us all off. Well, get the hell off Facebook, get the hell off Twitter, and touch grass sometime. We all know that. Everybody needs to get outside. Everybody needs someone they can talk to. Everybody needs someone they can interact with on a daily basis. We're humans. We're animals. We are social animals. Of course, lockdowns in contribution with digital media and social media will increase anxiety and emotional contagion. Who'd have fucking thunk it? However, to our knowledge, there has been no study that analyzes how different political institutions and the state affect the development and extension of mass hysteria. No shit. Why would the state fund a study about how the state makes things worse? The interplay of media, science, politics, and public is a real research gap. Building on the psychology related to the phenomenon of mass hysteria, we develop a political economy of mass hysteria, deriving important insights from a public health perspective. And multidisciplinary, man, these words, I tell you, I'm an educated guy. I got an advanced degree in everything, but sometimes words just trip me up. Syllables matter. In multidisciplinary analysis, beyond law and economics or sociological economics, we show that the size of the state exacerbates the negative consequences of mass hysteria. We show that the size of the state exacerbates the negative consequences of mass hysteria. I feel like this definitely needs much more detail gone into. It definitely needs much further explanation about what they're saying, and I'm hoping that we're going to get to there, because the size alone of the state, while libertarians love to say that if we had a smaller state, our problems would be solved, you need to say why. It's not the size of the state. It's not just how big it is. It's what it's doing when it throws its weight around. As a conceptual framework, we use a public choice approach to political institutions and comparative political economy based on economic principles. Developing a political economy of mass hysteria is important because it is important to examine how the political system influences the likelihood and development of mass hysteria. I'm not sure what political systems would matter. I'm not sure it would make any difference if we had a monarchy, we had a parliament, we had a republican democracy, if we had pure democracy. Actually, pure democracy might be the worst. People are panicky creatures. What's the line from Men in Black? People are smart. A person is smart, but people are dumb, panicky creatures. If you give people immediate control and absolute control, maybe it would just be worse if they're deciding the fates of other people. Because that's the principle of anarchy, everybody. It's not about no rulers. It's about ruling yourself. And that's what everyone seems to forget. This is because mass hysteria can lead to policy mistakes that have tragic public health consequences. Now, this is actually something that's been going around on Twitter today. There was an interviewer, I forget his name, I saw it briefly, was interviewing Dr. Fauci, and he just hammered Dr. Fauci on the mistakes of public policy over the past 18 months. Like things like, well, you had all these mistakes about the testing problems and tests not being available and illegitimate advice, telling people not to wear masks and then telling people to wear masks and then telling people there was a shortage of masks and telling people to social distance and then saying it was okay and then saying the vaccine was fine and then saying the vaccine didn't work. At what point do people lose faith in you? And Dr. Fauci said never. People should never lose faith in me because he's a fucking sociopath. It's pure narcissistic sociopathy that leads to people in that kind of a rank in government where they just believe they have a savior complex and nobody else can save you except for them from the problems that they've created. And the size of the government and government involvement in propaganda, they say it leads to policy mistakes because they're reacting to a populace that they have terrified and they have scared. While there are important limits on the potential growth of a mass hysteria in a limited minimal state, the welfare state of the 21st century, combined with a sensationalist mass media, is likely to increase the havoc created by mass hysteria. In this context, we comment on the illustrative case of the COVID-19 crisis. All right. There's a lot to unpack there just in the first half of this introduction. But it comes down to them trying to say it's the modern state that's the problem, not necessarily even the state. I could be wrong. We're going to see where this goes. But the issue that I seem to think that they're having is not necessarily that the state caused problems. It's the state's reaction to people's outrage and people's hysteria that caused problems, instead of getting to the root of what caused people's hysteria, and that was misinformation from the state in the first place. In the second section, we present a short history of mass hysteria. In this context, we also review the literature, theoretical and empirical, on mass psychogenic illness. In the following section, we present the importance of nocebo effects, explain how a mass hysteria evolves, and explain how negative information and anxiety contagion can contribute to mass hysteria in the information age. In this discussion section, we analyze the factors that limit and reduce mass hysteria in a free market setting. Moreover, in the same section, we show that these limiting mechanisms are not only disturbed by state action, but also examine the reasons why the state is likely to foster mass hysteria. Now, I don't agree with the use, again, I don't know what they're going to get to yet, but the argument that the free market can solve things. If you still have the state, it's the free market is not the state. The market is not the state. The state is not the market. Just saying the market setting could solve. We have a free market in information right now. We have blockchain. We have mesh networking. We have wide open internet. We have Web 2.0. We have the dark net. We have Tor. People can get information however they want. We have a free market of information. That's not the problem. The problem is state indoctrination and telling people that they should only use mainstream media. We conclude that collective hysteria may have contributed to policy errors during the COVID-19 pandemic that were detrimental to public health. In order to prevent the repetition of such policy errors, one should be aware of the political economy of mass hysteria developed in this article. Now, literature. History and methods. I'm not sure there's going to be much to take out of this section. We're going to go through it. I'm going to read it, but theoretically, this section should just be about the backbone, the history, the research, not any kind of a conclusion or anything based on modern and current events. But it should give us some context moving forward. In this article, we rely on case studies on mass hysteria, psychological research, and theoretical comparative political economy. Our article focuses on empirical data on mass hysteria and research related to public health and anxiety contagion. We analyzed the role of nocebo effects in mass hysteria and research on the negativity bias of the human mind. On this basis, we develop a comparative political economy of mass hysteria. We compare the conditions for a mass hysteria to develop in a modern welfare state with the conditions in a limited, minimal state. Note that these differences between the welfare state and a minimal state apply fortiori to a comparison between the modern state and a primitive law society. Because a private law society, I don't know why I read primitive there. Might be going back to my anarcho-primitivist days, but maybe that was a Freudian slip. Just burn it all down to the ground and let's go live in the woods in New Hampshire. Between the modern state and a private law society, because in a private law society, the state is non-existent. Well, boy, wouldn't that be incredible? How do we live in a private law society? In a mass hysteria, people of a group start to believe that they might be exposed to something dangerous, such as a virus or a poison. They believe a threat to be real because someone says so, or because it fits their experience. Due to the threatening delusion, a large group of people gets collectively very upset. In other words, a threat, whether real or imaginary, causes collective anxiety. The group members may even start to feel sick. Group members might also get symptoms of sickness, including weakness, headaches, or a choking feeling. Doesn't that sound like the symptoms of COVID-19? You're just kind of weak, maybe a little bit of cough, maybe a fever to go with it, but like nothing really major, just a mild flu or a cold. Weird that the symptoms of mass hysteria are very, very similar to the symptoms of COVID-19, which are propagated to other persons. Okay. When a mass hysteria causes physical symptoms, it is called mass psychogenic illness or epidemic hysteria. YouTube will most certainly nuke me if I tried to make the claim that COVID's not real. It's just a mass hysteria or epidemic hysteria, psychogenic illness. But boy, would that be a fun tinfoil hat to throw into the works. The symptoms are caused by the stress and anxiety people experience due to the perceived threat. Mass hysteria is infectious. If it wasn't infectious, the media wouldn't be pushing it. And may be a contributing and amplifying factor in real epidemics. Now, I love how they keep using the word epidemic here instead of pandemic. And that is something that is really noteworthy. So, like, a pandemic is so an epidemic is a disease that affects a large number of people within a community, population, or a region. And a pandemic is an epidemic that has spread to multiple countries or continents across the world. Like, they're not that dissimilar of words. And Alex asked in the chat, when was this article written? It was written in February, and it was just found on the National Institute of Health's website to this morning. The National Institute of Health approved it and published it. And Bill Barger sent it to me and was like, wow, we got to review this and react to it. But yeah, the difference between a pandemic and an epidemic is it's oddly narrow, and I'm wondering why they're using the word epidemic instead of pandemic. While there is, to our knowledge, no literature on the political economy of mass hysteria, the literature on mass psychogenic illness is rich and focuses on empirical analysis of specific cases. Kirchhoff analyzed the case of sickness, and it does cite Kirchhoff's paper analyzing the case of mass psychogenic illnesses. Analyzed the case of sicknesses that spread among workers of a plant due to the belief in a poisonous insect. Evidence that people just believed there was a poisonous insect, so they all got sick. Okay. McGrath, reviewing cases of mass hysteria, found that persons of low status in high-stress situations after a triggering dramatic event are most responsive to a mass psychogenic illnesses. So they're saying that this really only affects the poor. That's what I'm getting from McGrath in complexities, cautions, and concepts in research on mass psychogenic illness. Is the mass hysteria really affects the poor and people of low status more easily than the rest. So people most reliant on government help, people most reliant on the welfare state are those most at risk to be dealing with mass hysteria as a consequence and as a fallout from government welfare state. Schmidt and Fitzgerald analyzed 8 cases of mass psychogenic illness among workers. They found that low income, dissatisfaction with superiors, lack of support, and unclear work assignments led to a higher average number of reported symptoms. So when the economy sucks, people just think they get sick. If when the economy is bad, people get sick, why would we respond to an illness by shutting down the economy? It's mind-blowing. Absolutely mind-blowing. Singer points out that victims of mass psychogenic illness are really sick, even though there is no toxin. Singer believes that mass psychogenic illness occurs more often than we recognize, as it may appear simultaneously with physical progenitors of illness, and we only count pure cases of mass psychogenic illness. Alex, I think it affects the most vulnerable, which usually happens to be the poor. You are correct. I think that's the point they were trying to get there, is that people who are less stable, people who have more needs, the poor and the more destitute, people who have less favorable work conditions and are unhappier with their work conditions are the most at risk for mass psychogenic illness. And that when there are poor economic conditions in a given environment, it can lead to mass psychogenic illness. I think that's the point they're getting across here. And it blows my mind. And right here, that it often appears alongside or simultaneous to an actual illness blows my mind, because it seems really simple. It seems really straightforward there. And it's mind-blowing. You'd think that people in government, policy advisors who are making decisions about whether or not we should shut down the economy, lock people in their homes, and threaten people's livelihoods to combat a flu-like illness, would have people who are familiar with the research into what the fuck happens when you lock down the economy. All right, moving on. There also exists more theoretical-oriented literature related to mass psychogenic illness. So we're getting into theory here, not stuff that's evidenced. So Pennebaker argued that in order to reduce the possibility of mass psychogenic illness, the true cases of anxiety must be diminished. I don't know how you're getting rid of anxiety on a large scale. Singer discussed the role of social comparison as a cause of mass psychogenic illness, emphasizing the role of stress. Friedman discussed theories of contagion in reference to mass psychogenic illness, claiming that contagion, conformity, and emergent norms may play a role in spreading the hysteria. Stahl used labeling theory, emergent norms, and coping theories to explain and understand mass psychogenic illness. Kirchhoff emphasized the importance of collective tension in the origination of mass psychogenic illness. Now, to me, this is just screaming that a population that is unhappy, a population that is stressed, a population that's going through a rough time, whether it's national turmoil, war, a pandemic, an election, stressful fucking times where the country seems to be ripping apart at the seams, are more likely to develop psychogenic illness and display side effects of a disease they do not have. That's the research. That's what it says. It makes total fucking sense to me why so many people test negative and get sick, and so many people test positive and have no symptoms. But we'll see what they have to say about it. As can be seen in the literature review, the literature reviewed details with outbreaks of mass psychogenic illness, mostly in localized settings of schools or companies. Watch out, Jeff Bezos. You don't give those people a break, they're all just going to collapse one day. Unfortunately, there are no studies on the possibility of more widespread or even global cases of mass hysteria. However, the digital age of global mass and social media raises the possibility of such a phenomenon. Our study of the political economy of mass hysteria draws on the well-established psychological phenomenon of mass hysteria, but applies it to a new and innovative context for which no literature yet exists. More specifically, it analyzes how the political system can influence the likelihood and spread of mass hysteria in a digitized and globalized world. The political system can influence the likelihood and spread of mass hysteria in a digitized and globalized world. The political system can influence the likelihood and spread of mass hysteria in a digitized and globalized world. Let that sink in. How obvious that is to libertarians, how obvious that is to people who abhor state action, how obvious that is to people who have seen this country and this world tearing apart at the seams for the past decades and the past years. That the political systems influence the likelihood and spread of anything in a digitized and globalized world. We are more connected now than we have ever been in human history. People from all across the country, all across the world, will watch this video on YouTube and Odyssey. And I'm doing it from my home office in Manchester, New Hampshire. We are more connected than ever before. Of course, our ideas are going to transfer over that connection. Of course, our fears, our anxieties, our hopes, our wishes, our dreams. This is why we stand a chance for true social and political change today, but also why we are at such risk of governments clamping down, cutting off our communication channels, locking us in our homes. Like the next step is cutting you off from the internet. And this article might even make the case that that's what it's going to take to cure the pandemic. The empirical evidence of mass hysteria, i.e. collective anxiety due to a perceived threat, dates back to at least the Middle Ages and continues to numerous cases in modern times. I'm curious what they're citing. They got 4 citations here for numerous cases in modern times. Mystery gas and analysis of mass hysteria, mass psychogenic illness, demography and symptom profile of an episode. The Phantom Anesthetist of Mattoon, a field study of mass hysteria among school children, early loss as a predisposing factor. None of those really give a hint in the title about what they're about, but they really sound like interesting reads to understand this. One of the most famous cases is a hysteria that developed after a radio play written by Orson Welles, The War of the Worlds, was broadcast in 1938. Those of you who aren't familiar with The War of the Worlds, God, it's an incredible piece of literature, a great book, a great radio play, definitely worth listening to and reading. It's one of the greatest pieces of fiction ever developed, and it's one of the most profound pieces of fiction for the effect that it did have on the world. As a student of literature, as an author myself, I absolutely love what Orson Welles was able to accomplish with The War of the Worlds. And God, the amount of death threats that man must have got afterwards. In the radio play, an attack from Martians on the Earth occurs. Some of the listeners, possibly still under the suspense of the recent Munich Agreement at the same year, allegedly felt a panic, thinking they were really under attack by the Martians. This was a real thing. There was mass panic in the United Kingdom and the United States, I believe. I'd have to look into it, get the exact details. But when this radio play was happening, it opens up with a news report about Martians attacking. And people who were just listening to the radio expecting a play got hit with a news report of a Martian attack. And the mass hysteria led to a bunch of hallucinations, false sightings, people panicking, riots, people calling 911 and claiming that the Martians were landing in their town, claiming they could see the spaceships and the Martians were killing people and their neighbors. Like absolute mass hysteria. Like incredible. work of art. Another interesting, more recent case are the effects of an episode of the Portuguese TV show Strawberries with Sugar. In the show, the characters got infected with a life-threatening virus. Sounds familiar? After the episode had been broadcasted, more than 300 Portuguese students fell ill. They reported symptoms similar to the ones in the TV show characters had experienced, and among these symptoms were rashes and difficulties to breathe. As a result, these symptoms, several schools in Portugal actually closed. However, an investigation of the Portuguese National Institute for Medical Emergency concluded that the virus did not exist in reality, and that these symptoms were caused by the anxiety watching the show, i.e. these symptoms were caused by mass hysteria. So these are the most terrifying words I've read so far, pushing for an admission based on mass hysteria that the virus did not exist in this particular case. And for those of you who know me, for those of you who have followed my coverage of the pandemic and the global COVID scare, like from the get-go, I've been of the believing in the science and believing in the evidence that, yes, there is a pandemic, there is a COVID-19 virus. A lot of the fear is overblown. I do believe it is hysteria. I believe it is no more than a flu, and that's based on my medical training, my experience working in the medical field, and my understanding of how viruses develop and evolve and how they affect the human immune system. That it is just a really bad flu. People will get over it. People will move on. But there have been a lot of people, a lot of free staters, a lot of libertarians, a lot of anarchists who have taken the approach of the virus doesn't exist. It's all a government scam. They call it the scamdemic or the plandemic. And my greatest fear coming out of this is that one day the United States government is going to release a article like this that just says, concluded that the virus did not exist in reality. And I'm going to have to go back to those people and say, well, you were right. Fuck yeah. Alex Jones was right again. Who the fuck saw that coming? But Andrew Olding commenting in chat, Libertarian Party of Delaware doesn't exist. COVID does. We all know Delaware is not a real state. Delaware doesn't exist. Joe Biden is a made-up corporation. All right. And the symptoms were caused by the anxiety watching the show, i.e. symptoms were caused by mass hysteria. 2076, thanks for joining us tonight. Awesome. Great job in the comments on Tim Pool's live stream with the Free State Project and Jeremy Kaufman the other night. You were doing some good work recruiting there. All right. There is another recent case of mass hysteria connected to a virus on the Emirates Flight 203 in September 2018. Some passengers were showing flu-like symptoms. Flu-like symptoms. When other passengers observed these symptoms, they started to feel sick as well. And a panic broke out. That sounds familiar, except instead of just on a plane, maybe on a fucking country. The panic reached such an extent that the whole flight was quarantined once it reached New York. Nice playbook. The investigation after the incident showed that only a few passengers actually had the seasonal flu or a common cold. Indeed, diseases are an ideal ground for mass hysteria to develop. All right, I think I'm going to learn a new word here. Nocebo effects and the evolution of mass hysteria. I don't know the word nocebo. That's a new one to me. I get a pretty good educated guess on what it means, but we're going to find out, and hopefully context brings this one home for us. All right, nocebo effects. It is well known that in addition to placebo effects, so-called nocebo effects exist. Nocebo effects can make you feel pain. Okay. One hell of a name for a cited article. Pretty to the point there. Due to the placebo effect, a person recovers from an illness because they expect to recover. When a person suffers from a nocebo effect, on the contrary, they get ill just because they expect to become ill. Now, I mean, show of hands here. I mean, crazy, but how many people do you think got COVID just because they expected to be COVID? How many people had just mild COVID, stayed home, never got a test, never went to the hospital because they never got bad enough, simply because they expected to get COVID? All right. Like, How much of the nocebo effect had to do with the mass outbreaks? And there was points where testing wasn't available, but they were counting cases. How many people were treated with nocebo effects? We don't know. We'll never know. We're just guessing here. But the NIH published this. So, an intriguing and famous case of a nocebo effect is the case of a man who tried to commit suicide. The man was involved in a clinical study taking an experimental drug. In order to kill himself, he swallowed 29 capsules of the drug, believing he would not survive. I think this really depends on what the drug is. I haven't looked forward yet. AJ, what did I tune into? You tuned into our reaction to one of the more recent studies published by the National Institute of Health. It was written in February, but just became available this morning. You can follow the link in the description if you want to read along. But it's how government contributed to a mass hysteria, and government made mistakes planning in COVID because they caused a mass hysteria. Published by the government. Alex, sounds like nocebo is the same as psychosomatic. That's the word I use for it. Psychosomatic, that's the word I've always used for it. People making themselves sick because they expect to be sick. All right. Now, many free staters take that many pills on an average Friday. I was going to get to that. Depends what the pill is. There's some pills out there that I think if you take 29, you're just going to like talk to God for a week and come back down. But all right. However, the capsules that he was taking were placebos, as he was a member of the control group in a clinical study. And believing that he was going to die, he developed serious symptoms and arrived at a hospital with extremely low blood pressure. Correct me if I'm wrong, but aren't placebos sugar pills? Was this guy diabetic and swallowed 29 sugar pills? I don't know. Other things that can cause that. When finally the doctor directing the medical trial arrived, the doctor told the patient that he had swallowed placebos. As a consequence, the man recovered within 15 minutes. I don't know, maybe telling him that he took placebos was the placebo effect there. Due to the nocebo effect, the expectation to become ill can cause real symptoms in a self-fulfilling prophecy. In this way, a mass hysteria may develop when people believe they will become ill. Anxiety and fear contribute to this process. Indeed, during the Spanish flu in the wake of World War I, pause right here. The Spanish flu is the most commonly brought up pandemic that of the modern age, the closest thing to a pandemic of the modern age. People don't want to talk about the Hong Kong flu. People seem to forget about the Hong Kong flu that took place in the 70s. I believe Woodstock was actually a super spreader event for the Hong Kong flu, which was the last real main big pandemic that was globally. But the Spanish flu has been like the bar of pandemic that we've been holding up for people. Like how many people died, how far spread it was, what percent of the population died, what percent of the population got sick. The Spanish flu is just something people couldn't handle. And it's a lot of what people are going back to support the lockdowns and the stay-at-home orders and the shutdowns and the quarantines is evidence from the Spanish flu. And the United States government did enforce social lockdowns and economic lockdowns during the Spanish flu. But it wasn't on a federal level. I think it was individual cities and states kept doing it on their own. In one of the big evidences, I think it was the second pump or second spike, the major spike where a lot of people got killed, was Denver lifting its lockdown. Denver fucking had seen an all-time, real low of cases. And they're like, all right, we've kind of dealt with Spanish flu. We're going to lift our lockdown. And then a month later, had a massive spike and a bunch of people got sick and died. People use that as evidence to say we should keep the lockdowns in place. I tell them to face the wall, but hey. The second bubonic plague pandemic killed 200 million people. COVID is a complete wuss. Yeah, it needs to step up its fucking game. All right. The Spanish flu in the wake of World War I panic contributed to a mass hysteria and deaths that otherwise would not have occurred, because panic can have adverse health effects on ill persons. Once some people develop a hysteria, it can easily spread to other people because fear and anxiety are contagious. I'm going to go back to this one. Panic can have adverse effects on ill persons. They're going to cite Scaring Ourselves to Death by Gondel. Does have availability on it. Apparently, it's an AEIR article. So if you're fans of Jeffrey Tucker, that's his organization. that helps that puts that stuff out. So nice to see them getting some props and cited here in an academic article on NIH. But I think there's even more literal cases of panic killing people. Remember the Fukushima nuclear accident in Japan? Do you know how many people died from fallout nuclear radiation? Absolutely zero. Aside from the immediate tsunami deaths and the people who died in the earthquake, which is unavoidable, there's nothing you can do about that. It's tragic, but it's a force of nature, an act of God. You cannot plan for a tsunami or an earthquake. You can do your best to build in anticipation of them, but it's not really gonna. It's not something you can hold against government planning when it happens. But the Fukushima nuclear reactor melted down and spewed a bunch of radiation, and nobody died. Nobody died, except the patients in a nearby hospital who were taken off of life support when they shut down the power to evacuate them. Because they panicked. They didn't follow the hospital's shelter in place for any kind of a disaster protocol, and they tried to evacuate patients out of the hospital, and it killed them. All right. In principle, pseudo-infectious people could be cured by mere information. In this way, mass hysteria could be prevented from becoming a burden on the health system. As discussed below in detail, the problem in a mass hysteria is that there are reasons both media and state may actively contribute to the contagion of fear and spread biased information. In other words, the doctor telling the patient that they had swallowed placebos never arrives. I wonder if eating irradiated fish has affected anyone's lifespan. Andrew, you'd be amazed at the capability that nature has to process low levels of radiation in the environment. In fact, if you were to go to Fukushima today, immediately after that fallout, you would experience a lower level of radiation than you do in background radiation living in New Hampshire because of the radon and the granite. Like, you're exposed to more radiation just living in New Hampshire than you would be touring the Fukushima nuclear site. All right. But the problem in mass hysteria is that there are reasons both media and the state may actively contribute to the contagion of fear and spread biased information. In other words, the doctor telling the patient they've swallowed placebos never arrives. This just sounds like Anthony Fauci getting on TV and doubling down, like, repeatedly. Like, no, we just changed our mind on masks. You should wear them, even though we said they're ineffective. No, we changed our mind on social distancing and lockdowns. We need to go back inside. It's not good. Or COVID doesn't spread below 5 feet, so it's okay to take your mask off when you're sitting in a restaurant, but not while you're walking to your table. It's absolutely mind-blowing. Robert in the comments, the average age of death from COVID-19 is almost the same as the average lifespan. We're going to get to that. I did skim through at the bottom. There's some charts in this article. We're going to get to that. And we're going to cover that in a little bit of a good amount of detail. All right. Mass hysteria, irrationality, biases, and COVID-19. Hysteria can not only cause people to suffer symptoms, hysteria, be it collective or not, can make people behave in ways that other persons unaffected by the hysteria would likely consider to be irrational. Under the illusion of a non-existing or highly exaggerated threat, people act in ways that, in the absence of the illusion, would seem absurd. Alternatively, behavior in mass hysteria can be considered biased. I think any and all behavior in any situation can be considered biased. To say that in a hysteria or out of a hysteria it's biased, to me that's just kind of lazy. Like, behavior is biased. You have your biases, you have your opinions, you have your understanding of the facts. Before you make any decision on your behavior is biased. Psychological research on risk perception has found that some mental rules that people apply in an uncertain world create persistent and important biases. Biased media coverage, incomplete and asymmetric information, personal experiences, fears, inability to understand and interpret statistics, and other cognitive biases lead to distorted risk judgments. I want to consider this, but first, finally joining us from his nap, Bill slept in. We have Bill Barger joining the program. Bill, biased media coverage, incomplete and asymmetric information, personal experiences, fear, inability to understand and interpret statistics, and other cognitive biases lead to distorted risk judgments. Are they saying that stupid people make bad decisions?
Yeah, that's why I tell them what to think. Like when to wake up, what time the podcast is at, etc. Find my mouse. Shit.
But
yeah,
to me, that's what I read there. Biased media coverage. So we can go on and on about biased media coverage all we want. We can cover that for hours, days, weeks. The media fucking sucks. I just did a podcast with an independent journalist who was arrested for reporting on January 6th last night. You guys should go check that one out. He's great. But we talked a lot about biased media and like how terrible the media is with their bias and how they approach things, and preventing incomplete and asymmetric information. They keep people stupid. They withhold information based on their bias, and mass hysteria affects people because they're ill-informed and uninformed and are fucking stupid. Again, going back to the Men in Black quote, a person is smart, but people are dumb, panicky creatures.
Yeah, it's one of those things where like this article is clearly, and I know I missed all the beginning of it, and you probably already talked about this. They're clearly like putting this out as like a article, or it seems at least like it's a study that was released, not to give to the public about what may have been going on with them, but to give to other like government people. Like, hey, just so you know, if you're wondering like what people do in situations of crisis and how they respond with more and less government, here you go. Here's like a blueprint.
Well, I do think there is some bias in the article. So I've been checking some of their citations as we do go. This one's in German. Clearly not going to be able to check that. Or Perception of Risk by Slovic. I haven't been following through and reading the citations, but it's been interesting to see who they've been citing and what kind of cases they've been citing. One of their citations was Jeffrey Tucker and AIER, the American, whatever Jeffrey Tucker's little American Economic Independent Research.
Yeah. Which has been, I think, been cited as an alt-right organization before, which is hilarious.
Right. So they certainly have their own biases in where they're choosing to go get their information. We can tell from the conclusion of this article that they're arguing in favor of a more limited government approach and a more hands-off approach, which suits my ends. It definitely suits my ends, but it doesn't mean I don't want to pick apart the article. It doesn't mean I don't want to pick it apart and like point out the inconsistencies and the contradictions and the issues within the article and the like cherry-picked reporting. And that's what we're doing tonight, Andrew. You did ask what the hell you tuned into. We're just doing a read, review, and react, and we're doing it live. Bill was supposed to be here an hour ago. We picked the time based on his schedule. All right.
I'm so sorry. Oh man.
But moving on. but moving on from the stupid people argument here. Risk perceptions may be particularly biased when risks are viewed as unfair, uncontrollable, unknown, frightening, potentially catastrophic, and impacting future generations. How many times have we heard it's for the children? How many times have we heard do it for the children? Everything is always do it for the children. Gun control for the children. Inoculation for the children. Shut down the economy for the children. Fucking force your kids back into government schools for the children. That's the argument for every statist approach and every encroachment and growth of government we have seen in the past decade is for the children. Impacting future generations. Fucking awful. Whether we call people's behavior in a mass hysteria irrational or biased is not essential to the purpose of this article. Doesn't matter. It doesn't matter if you're biased or irrational. So Andrew Olding in chat says, I'm unbiased. No, you're not, but it doesn't matter. It is not essential to the purpose of this article as we purport to develop a political economy of mass hysteria. Now, I'm not an economist. They've used this word a number of times so far in the article, and I think people in the chat, I've just kind of glossed over and moved past it, and there's been other words I don't know. I don't know what the fuck a political economy is. I've never studied economics. I've never gone deep into economics. But
people, you trade people info for votes.
Yeah. All right, put your headphones on, Bill. All right, that's better. Yeah, so we're going to examine to the extent which the state influences on the development of mass hysteria and the irrational or unbiased behavior typical of it. Andrew asks, what about irrational, repugnant, and biased?
Sounds like my kind of reporting.
That is a deep cut joke, and I'm here for it.
That sounds like my kind of reporting.
Also reported that gun control for the children is waiting till they are 6 to take them shooting.
Gun control for... Go ahead.
If you're waiting till they're 6, I don't think you're giving them a good head start. All right, moving on. And Bill, at any point, just interrupt me as I'm reading if you got something to point out or make commentary on, because that's what we're here for, is to fucking make commentary. All right.
Oh, that's great interrupting people.
If and to what extent the world has been suffering from mass hysteria or mass psychogenic illness during the COVID-19 crisis is open to future research, even though some observers have made that claim. They made that claim in Madness. Lockdown skeptics. Okay, he's citing blogs here. Like, how this passed peer review. And honestly, that's insane to me that it passed peer review because he's citing blogs.
So I had thoughts about this. Like, I didn't know if it was past peer review or not. I didn't really look into that. But I had thoughts just like, okay, if it's not past peer review, that doesn't make any of the conclusions you can reach just through logic like false. If it does pass peer review and it doesn't hold up well, what does that say about the peer review process? Like, either way, I'm not impressed.
All right. It is clear in any case that the population has been under tremendous psychological strain during the COVID-19 crisis, especially lockdowns have contributed to a surge in anxiety and stress, which are important ingredients for the development of mass hysteria. Citing,
I love that phrase.
Increased psychological distress during COVID-19 and quarantine in Ireland, a national survey. This is one I actually probably want to look into, probably want to follow up on. This actually looks like a scholarly article. It's got like 7 authors. But it was published in October 2020, only 6 months into the pandemic. So that's kind of crazy. In a survey conducted in the U.S. from 24 to 30 June, 40 of what year? It doesn't say of what year. We've had this pandemic going for 2 Junes now, so who knows? 40.9% of participants reported at least one adverse mental health condition, and 10.7% reported to have considered suicide seriously in the last 30 days. Mental health, substance abuse, and suicidal ideation during the COVID-19 pandemic. United States, June 24 to 30, 22. That was at the beginning of the pandemic.
Dude, we're not even at table 1 yet.
Like, no, this is going to be a while, but that was at the beginning of the pandemic, okay? 40.9% of participants in this study reporting at least one adverse mental health condition at the beginning of the pandemic.
Yeah, so this study also, with response to what months, this is from February this year this is published.
Right.
So it's last June.
But like, we are now 20 months into this pandemic. This study is citing mental health statistics from 6 months into it. How much fucking worse are they now?
Yes, agreed. We don't know. But definitely not better. Like, you think this is going to be better from 12 more months? Yeah. No, I agree.
Additionally, the frequency of alcohol consumption during lockdowns increased 14% in the U.S.
Cheers to
that. Because the state liquor store was deemed essential services.
Well, they had to leave one state business open.
You know, it's kind of fucking crazy if you think about that. Like, liquor use and alcohol use is up. And when the lockdowns truly went into like force and it was like essential business only and essential services left open and non-essential services closed, the fact that the state, which has taken on all this responsibility for all sorts of things, including the education and management of children's upbringing and lives with the public school system, decided that raising and educating children was non-essential, but providing alcohol was.
Yep.
All right.
That sounds right. What do they make more money off of, Justin? Come on.
The future tax base.
Well, we'll see. Not if we have our way.
At least some anecdotal evidence points to the possibility of mass hysteria as manifested by the hoarding of toilet paper and other essentials. I mean, come on, you guys, don't be fucking stupid.
The masked driving of single persons in their cars? No, nothing crazy about that.
Yeah. And people virtually not leaving their houses, not even for a walk, even though the risk of being infected outdoors with physical distancing is minuscule.
By the way, that's the law in Australia.
Right. I was going to say
that right there.
It's not the risk of infection that I think is keeping people locked up. It's the risk of persecution, prosecution, and arrest. Like that was keeping people truly locked up, at least in Australia and some of the more statist states in the United States. Alex comments in chat, to be fair, public schools do more harm than good. I will not dispute that fact. That is an absolute fact. Andrew Olden comments, the most important thing the state of New Hampshire does is sell liquor. That's not a joke. I'm not being funny. I don't think you're wrong. You are 100% on the nose, and it shouldn't be something the state does. Even though it's the most important thing they do, they shouldn't fucking do it.
I would actually argue if the state provides an essential service, it is the liquor distribution, and it is a goddamn shame that the state has been charged with such an important task.
Robert Spina in chat, I've seen someone with the mask and face shield while driving solo. It's terrifying. It's fucking wild. And we've all seen the videos of Karens with their mask and face shield on planes freaking out and like slapping people because they took their mask off to take a bite of their fucking peanuts. At least you're in a fucking closed space and closed fucking tin container, and it makes sense to be worried about rebreathing the air there. But like in your fucking car by yourself, Jesus Christ! I remember early on in the pandemic, I was going out and like hiking in Wildcat Falls. It's a nice little easy fucking hike, and nice little like 2-mile walk. No real elevation game, but it's a nice little beach and waterfall there. Beautiful thing. And people would walk off the trail 20 feet into the woods and wait till I passed to come back and continue their hike. Because I wasn't wearing a mask. Fucking asinine. All right. Moving on.
And I will say, like, it's like some people, you were saying a lot of times it's like people being afraid to, like, what is this hysteria about? Is it hysteria about getting locked up for doing the wrong behavior? And for some people, sure, it's like the hysteria is if I leave my home during the wrong hours or if I'm doing the wrong thing, if I'm on the way to the grocery store or not on the way to the grocery store, then I'll get in trouble. For some other people, it's just like, no, I'll go outside, but I better not be around one of those people who's not afraid to wear a mask. Like they're totally bought into it. Like it's right. Totally not like a fear of consequence other than death. It's like we already touched on how, did we touch on? Use that deliberately to scare people, the inherent human fear of suffocation. That we get into that later. Anyway, yeah. Sorry, go on.
Andrew comments again, the filters on planes are medical grade, so it might not be that necessary there. Then again, I was told that by an airport bartender, and I've not looked that up. No, here's the thing, Andrew. AJ, the filters on airplanes are among the best air recirculating systems on the planet. Like the technology can provide, they are absolutely phenomenal and incredible. They absolutely filter out pathogens when they're recirculating air. But they don't filter out the pathogen the person next to you is breathing onto you before it can get to the filter. No filter can do that. All right. Similarly, some people have been scared by SARS-CoV-2 to an extent not easily explainable by their own minuscule risk of death from it, citing low-endous infection fatality rate of COVID-19 inferred from seroprevalence data. Published in Bulletin of World Health Organization. All right.
I was disappointed in this table coming up because it doesn't show the estimated survival rate. There is an article that does show this. I think it's by the New York Times. I could be wrong. That does show
earlier on.
Go ahead.
Yeah, earlier on, Robert Spina in chat had this comment, the average age of death from COVID-19 is almost the same as the average lifespan. And here's the table we're getting at is the survival rate of COVID-19 in the United States per different age group. And you definitely look like 0 to 19 years old, 99.997% survival rate. 20 to 49 years old, 99.98% survival rate. 50 to 69% years old, 99.5%. 70 plus years old is the first time you dip below a 99% survival rate. You go to 94.6%. I don't know what the average lifespan in the U.S. is. I'm gonna look that up right now. Average lifespan in the United States. And we get 78.79 years is the average lifespan in the U.S. So yeah, above 70, definitely gets more risk for just dying of old age, of just not waking up one day above the age of 70 is a very plausible risk. And the source for this data is the Center for Disease Control and Prevention, pandemic planning scenarios available online. But it does say they do their own calculations. I do wish they'd publish those calculations.
Well, so I will say two things about this data. The first is that calculation is from February of this year, probably from earlier. This was published in February, meaning that calculation probably comes from like
before
December,
the Delta variant.
December or January. I do believe that number there, all those numbers are actually lower. So I think, hold on, let me scroll back up to this here. I could be wrong. I think the survival rate for 0 to 19 years old is now 99.999% by their calculations. The same CDC calculations.
Even with the Delta variant?
The Delta variant is less deadly.
We've only been through one winter so far, too. And any flu-like illness is going to have a spike in the winter. That's when human immune systems are at their weakest, when their exposure to the elements and cold actually does reduce your body's ability to fight back against viruses to a certain degree. So it makes sense that you're going to have more deaths in the winter. Bill's got the Rona, everybody. F in chat. F for Bill. But... So it makes sense that the numbers, after a year of having a lull in deaths and a non-serious season, even with the Delta variant, would be reduced and the survival rate would go up. But I wouldn't be surprised to see if we do have another. Like, I hate to say it, but I think in the next coming weeks, we're going to see spikes in COVID deaths. I think we're going to see spikes in COVID cases in the next couple of weeks, especially with the Delta variant, the Mu variant, the Alpha variant. I think there was an Omega variant talked about even at some point. Because we're going,
it's getting to be like crypto. It's getting to be like crypto. Is crypto going to go up or not? It's like, which crypto? Is the virus going up and down or down? I don't know which virus. Like,
Andrew asks, who's more mad about these names, Delta Airlines or Corona beer? I think Delta Airlines. Delta Airlines is an arm of the federal government. They are so heavily subsidized as part of the regulation that they'll fucking whatever. They could. They've also been. Delta got fucked, but so did their competition. They have an equal standing, equal grounds, equal landing page in the non-competitive space of air travel. Corona almost went out of fucking business.
Also, Delta has been priding themselves as being a vector of disease for generations, as far as I know.
Yeah. All right, where were we? All right, another indicator of overestimation of the threat is the number of deaths. As of 22 January 2021, 2.1 million deaths have been classified as COVID-19 related. However, other diseases are equally or even far more deadly and do not trigger panic or unprecedented government intervention. This section is going to be fucking rich. I can just see how rich this section is going to get.
Yep.
This will make people big mad when it hits Twitter. In other words, the probability to die from COVID-19 is not only very low in absolute terms, but it is also lower than the probability to die from other diseases. It is true that the majority of these other diseases are not as infectious as SARS-CoV-2. This fact has contributed to the panic and led to government interventions that do not occur with other diseases that are even more deadly than COVID-19. The 10 leading causes of death worldwide can be seen in Table 2. All right. This is actually sloppy reporting. This is sloppy writing. This is bad research. None of these are communicable infectious diseases. None of these. The government can't stop any of these.
Hey, do not talk about the government like that.
Like, with the exception of lower respiratory infections. Yeah, with the exception of lower respiratory infections, which is the common cold, pneumonia, and flu, like, there's no similarity between any of these and COVID. Like, ischemic heart disease has as much of a genetic component as it does a personal risk component with diet, exercise, and lifestyle. Stroke, the same thing. It's as much genetic as it is diet, health, and exercise. And incredibly healthy people just drop of strokes every fucking day. But chronic obstructive pulmonary disease,
I think
you can blame the government for COPD insofar as that they fucking allowed the free market to develop cigarettes.
No, dude, I think you're taking this the wrong way. I don't think their point is that you can blame the government for these diseases. I think they're saying that these diseases have a bigger impact on human life and the government does not intervene. So they're not claiming that the government causes any of these deaths. They're just saying these things objectively cause the end of more human lives and the government does not step in at all.
They
now,
do, but
whether
it's by
the
government to step in is what I'm saying.
That's debatable. Listen, chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, like there's absolutely with diabetes, there's absolutely ways they could do that. They could literally, we're talking about forcing lifestyle choices, which they do for COVID. You know what I'm saying? Like this is already a thing. If we're taking the precedent set by the Rona, they could take less intrusive interventions and say you're not allowed to buy these products off the shelves anymore than saying you can't leave your home. Like theoretically, they could do that to prevent diabetes. Do you know what I'm saying? Like that. That's
to me,
doable.
honestly, the most important one on here and the one that stands out the fucking most is kidney diseases. End-stage renal failure in the United States is a major issue, and it's one that doesn't get talked about often. Like end-stage renal disease is a killer, and it's not because it's non-treatable. It's unfortunately only treatable via a transplant. Very difficult to come across a fucking matching transplant, unfortunately. But you can keep someone with end-stage renal disease alive almost indefinitely with dialysis and medication. And the problem is the United States medical system has made dialysis unavailable to you unless you're on Medicare. No private insurance is allowed to cover dialysis. No private insurance is allowed to cover kidney care. You have to be forced onto government health care if you want treatment for kidney disease in the United States. That's fucking wild to me. Because do you know what the main cause of end-stage renal failure is and kidney disease in the United States? Prescription medication side effects of drugs that have been approved by the FDA that destroy people's kidneys.
That's the biggest cause?
Correct.
Damn.
It's mostly diabetic medications, actually, too.
Well, and diabetes is one of the most preventable chronic illnesses that we have. There's so much of it. Like I was trying to explain the difference because there's two kinds of diabetes. My brother and my nephew.
There was a doctor on Joe Rogan There was a doctor on Joe Rogan last month who disagrees with you.
Dude, I mean, that's cool. There have been doctors on Joe Rogan disagree with me before. I just know that like one type of diabetes is in most cases lifestyle induced, and the other type of diabetes you grow up with. One of them is like a big threat to your immune system. The other one's really not. And the other one, you're actually like with type 1 diabetes, your immune system is attacking your insulin cells. Like if you produce insulin, your body shuts it down. Not your actual insulin cells, but it's like you produce. I can't think of what there's an in between your pancreas. There's like a certain chemical, and your T cells shut that shit down.
Immunoglobulin. All right.
Yeah.
Investigating the possibility and extension, because we are only about a quarter of the way through this.
I know, dude. I joined at the wrong time. I'm just slowing it down. It's already been an hour.
Investigating the possibility and extension of mass hysteria related to COVID-19 is beyond the scope of this article. That's actually really super fucking disappointing. I thought that's the whole point of what we were getting into, was trying to say COVID-19 was mass hysteria. Fuck these guys. That's a bait and switch. All right. In this article, we analyze more fundamental question, namely the role of the modern welfare state in mass hysteria.
I'm actually more stoked about that.
All right, fair enough.
Because they make a whole argument for a smaller government and less welfare state, rather than taking on the actual COVID hysteria. Which, like, there's a good point to circumvent that, because you could spend years unpacking all the horse shit that's been sold, which is fine. The real information, misinformation, just unpacking it, sorting good statistics from bad statistics. They're not here to do that, basically, is how I took this.
All right.
They're here to say, do these kind of things play into it, or do they make it like better or worse?
All right. So there can certainly be mass hysteria without the state in a private law society or within the context of a minimal state. This possibility exists due to the negativity bias of the human brain, as evidenced in Rosen-Roisman negativity bias, negativity dominance, and contagion, which makes people vulnerable to delusions. Due to biological evolution, we focus on bad news as it may represent a possible threat. Shoemaker hardwired for news using biological and cultural evolution to explain the surveillance function, focusing on negative news and feeling of loss of control. The relationship between anxiety and lack of control and loss of control, Minkela and Kelly, may cause psychological stress that can develop into a hysteria and propagate to a larger group. In a society with a minimal state, negative views may start such hysteria. Due to the negative news, some people start to believe in a threat. This threat evokes fear and begins to society. Symptoms can also in a society with a minimal state. So, I mean, they're not even. They're even saying right here, even with a minimal state, even with a smaller state, you still can have the possibility of hysteria. I think it's going to circle back to the fact that as long as the interconnectedness of the media, and as long as you have the interconnectedness of mass media, social media, internet, there's nothing you can do to stop mass hysteria.
Well, you definitely get to the point that you're on. I don't know if you've read all this study yet. They definitely do get to that later. They're like the nature of centralization makes it worse.
All right. This threat evokes fear and begins to spread in society. Symptoms can also spread. Le Bon, the crowd, called the spread of emotions through groups contagion. Once anxiety has spread and the majority of a group behaves in a certain way, there is a phenomenon of conformity, i.e. social pressure makes individuals behave in the same way as other members of the group. In the end, there may be a phenomenon that has been called emergent norms.
Welcome to the new normal.
When a group establishes a norm, everyone ends up following that norm. For example, if a group decides to wear masks, everyone agrees to that norm. Emergent norms may explain the later stages of contagion. Contagion by fear can lead to people to overreact strongly in a situation, even in a minimal state. Nonetheless, in a minimal state, there exist certain self-corrective mechanisms and limits that make it less likely for mass hysteria to run out of control.
This is where it gets really good.
All right,
we're actually
than I thought. All right, I thought we were only about a quarter of the way through this. There's only 2 more sections before fund. I do want to see who funded this, but at that point we'll get to who funded this.
And also, this section is the longest. This section here is the longest, to my recollection. This section 4, amplifiers and attenuators. It's like that's a read.
All right, so I'm going to fucking chew through this, and if something pops, but we're going to make sure this is read. Discussion of amplifiers and attenuators, mass hysteria, minimal state versus the welfare state.
Do you want me to read this one? Give you a break?
Oh, no, I'm on a roll.
All right, you got it. Sorry to interrupt.
We didn't quit when the Germans bombed Pearl Harbor.
So my nap's not going to get in the way. Good.
There are several corrective mechanisms and limits for a mass hysteria. There exist well-known strategies to reduce anxiety, stress, and fear, which individuals can employ in a society with a minimal state. Releasing tension from one's body through sports and exercise helps to limit psychological stress. Furthermore, it is essential to find distractions from the negative views and to socialize. It's important to fucking socialize, people. Get out of your fucking homes and touch grass. Without state restrictions, such distractions abound. Hysteria
before we go too far, they literally say get outside and talk to people right there. Get outside and talk to people. That's what that says. Like, you should be exercising outside and talking to people. Like, go socialize. Anyway, go on.
Hysteria may cause people to inflict harm on themselves and innocent bystanders. In a society with a minimal state, there exists an essential limit to the destruction resulting from mass hysteria, which is the enforcement of private property rights, which in theory is the only task of a minimal state.
I love that. I love that they're citing these things.
They are citing Ludwig von Mises' liberalism. And they're also citing Mises' human action. All right. Alex, I socialize on Twitter. That doesn't count, Alex. Get off Twitter. I know I'm the last person that should tell somebody to get off Twitter, but it's not good for any of
Wait, did Alex just say that Alex is a socialist?
No, she says I socialize on Twitter.
Yeah, socialist. Socializing?
All right.
Socialist.
I love that this medical research paper is citing liberalism and human action. That's absolutely fucking fantastic. All right. Most importantly, in such an institutional environment, there does not exist an institution that is powerful enough to massively violate private property rights, perhaps with the possible exception of the minimal state converting itself into a welfare state. Oh. In a minimal state, the only person that can violate private property rights is the state deciding to not be a minimal state anymore? Who the fucking thunk it? All right.
Yep.
In addition, while anyone in a hysteria related to public health may voluntarily close their own business, wear a mask, or stay home, in a minimal state, no one can use coercion to force others who are healthy and do not succumb to the hysteria to close their business, wear masks, or quarantine. And you can't force people to do shit. Robert comments, even Twitter tried to get Justin off Twitter. It failed. Yeah, I'm back, motherfucker. And I ain't going nowhere. A minority can just ignore the collective panic and continue to live their normal lives because they are free to do so. Such a minority can be an example and a wake-up call to those who do not succumb to the collective hysteria or are close to doing so.
This by the way, might be the most important paragraph in the whole study. Go on.
This minority may be especially attractive to borderline cases. Suppose that a small group of people during collective health hysteria continues to go shopping, to work, to socialize, to breathe freely, and does not fall ill. They use breathe freely there. It's fucking incredible. What language. And does not fall ill, massively and fatally. Having this example, the anxiety of observers may fall. Observers may follow their example, and the group of hysterics shrinks. But does it?
Well, I don't know. I think on a certain level it does, even if it's just like one domino at a time, right? So, for example, when I got back last year, I spent the whole first half of the year out in California. I got back where still it was like July or August, and everybody in the grocery store is still like wearing masks, whether they make you or not. And I went in there, I stopped wearing masks. My girlfriend was like, "Oh, we don't have to." I was like, "Listen, you're gonna be fine." You know, it's like there is definitely an easing factor. I don't know how many people, you know what I'm saying? Like, but there'd be people like who would see me not wearing my mask and be like, "Oh, you're great." Like they'd pull their mask down and smile at me. You know, it's like, it's cool. I don't know how many, but that effect exists for sure. It's a non-zero number.
All right. It is one of the core characteristics of decentralized systems that they allow for competition, error detection, and correction. Citing Marquette, something in German, Vegas, and from Independent Review, okay, and Treasure of the Euro from Terra Libertas. Okay. If the people that ultimately become role models for others through their interaction become ill and die, the panic would be confirmed. However, if there is really a hysteria and the threat is imagined or exaggerated, the fortune of the role models will be, on average, much better than is expected by those that succumb to the hysteria. A sufficient number and variety of role models allows observers to correct and adjust their expectations. From Hayek. It's not just Mises. He also cites Hayek in this medical journal. I love it.
All I'm saying that the National Institute of Health at some point, like they put out good stuff.
Yeah,
I guess it's not all bad.
Yeah. I think I get the point of this paragraph. I get the point that they're making, that it's important to not normalize hysteria. Sure. Maybe that's the argument. Maybe that is the argument for standing up to mandates and telling the 16-year-old fucking store clerk that you're not going to wear your mask because you don't want to normalize it. I've taken the other approach, and I've told people it's not the fight to have. That when you're going into the supermarket, it's not the place to have the fight about masks because you're arguing with the 16-year-old who's paid minimum wage and can't do shit about it. If you want to have that fight, go to the police station, go to the DMV, go to the registry, go to town hall, go to places and force them to deny you essential government services because you won't comply. That is where you have that fight, and that's what I've always preached. But this one, they seem to be making the other argument that you should be refusing to do it at the grocery store. You should be refusing to do it at the mall or at the local park or other local venues because you don't want to normalize compliance and hysteria. I understand that. I'm still not sold on it.
Well, I'll say what I got from that was not so much that, and it's cool. It's actually, I like that we're getting different takeaways almost from every paragraph. Yeah. I got more that if people choose, if there's a group of people who chooses not to do it, like for example, a control group experiment,
right?
Like for the experiment, well, if it really is deadly, they will fare very much worse, right? By going and living their lives, they will either die or fall seriously ill or end up in the hospital. Yep. And if there is no risk, then they will be able to live their lives and fare exponentially better than people who have stayed home, etc. So it's like because they've been able to breathe freely, live their lives, and also go out and do things while still, I guess, like being in the world, whereas other people are eliminating or like half of that. They're like, well, I can either be in the world, but I can't breathe freely, or I can't like go to all my places, or I can't talk to people. Like, you're gonna have a better life basically if the risk doesn't exist than you would if the risk did exist and you ignored it. Like
Robert points out, I had that fight at my voting precinct, and I told them it was unconstitutional to force me to wear a mask to be able to vote for the recall of Newsom. I filed a complaint with the state of California. Unfortunately, dude, you're fighting with the state of California. Like, they don't give two fucks about your rights in California. You're going to just pack up and move and get out of that fucking shithole before it breaks off and floats off in the Pacific. But, like, the reality is, I do think that they will have a legitimate case to say you weren't forced to wear a mask in the precinct, because didn't they offer no cause absentee voting, allowed everyone to vote by mail? You can say what you want about vote for mail, but it did do away with the argument that being denied access to the polling place was depriving you of your right to vote. It's bullshit, but it's the state of California. I don't know what you expect from them. All right. Thus, there exists important limits for mass hysteria to harm life and liberty in a minimal state. Moreover, natural mechanisms that reduce stress, anxiety, and hysteria can operate freely. Decentralized competition for solutions alleviates pressure to conform and facilitate breaking out of hysteria. Competition allows discovering information about the real danger of the perceived threat, while the havoc inflicted by the collective hysteria is limited by the protection of private property rights in a private law society or a minimal state. Such limits can be easily overcome by a modern welfare state. In fact, a well-organized group, Olson, A Logic of Collective Action from Harvard University, that has been infected by collective hysteria may be in charge of the state or get control of the state apparatus. Okay, that is the crux there. That's the crux of all of this there, is like, if the state has unlimited power, what happens when the people in charge of the state go crazy? Like,
yeah, that probably is the crux right there.
even if there's mass hysteria, even if it's not real, what happens when it infects the people who are in charge of making decisions that affect the lives of other people?
Well, they were organized. They were organized, Justin, so we have to give them credit. They were well organized.
In such a position, this group can impose measures on the rest of the population, inflicting almost unrestricted harm. It must be taken into account here that a welfare state can also be a state which is bound by the rule of law, Hayek's legislation and liberty, and Hayek's Constitution of Liberty, in which repressive interventions by the executive can be lifted by the judiciary. All right. Repressive interventions by the executive can be lifted by the judiciary. Do they not realize that our judiciary is appointed by the executive? Like, it's some complete and utter fucking bullshit. I know last summer I sued the state of New Hampshire along with a bunch of other libertarian candidates about their fucking lockdown bullshit affecting our ability to petition and get ballot access in New Hampshire. And we won, barely. The judge gave us a half helping victory. Like, he didn't strike down the dumbass fucking rules. He just reduced the number of signatures we had to get. The judges are appointed by the governors that you're fighting against. The governors who are making these unconstitutional mandates are the ones who appoint the fucking judges that tell them whether or not it's constitutional. And that's a cushy fucking appointment. It's a lifetime appointment with the fucking 6-figure salary and full federal pension benefits.
Which means that ideally you appoint somebody and they never have to worry about your opinion again. But most often they're like,
they want the next seat up. They want to move up.
Yeah. But ideally you'd think it's like, well, I got this nice cushy gig. I never have to care about anything again. I'm going to go in there with all my integrity, all my principles. I'm going to uphold all those things. Like, there's a cushier gig waiting for you if you pay off the right guy.
I will say Judge LaPlante, federal judge for the District of New Hampshire, was the fairest I could have imagined a federal judge being when he heard our case for LPNH v. New Hampshire. Like,
nice.
Blew my mind when I testified, and like the judges, like I called the state's attorney an idiot to his face, and the judge laughed. Like that kind of shit, like blew my mind. And then he came back and said, "You won." I'm like, "Oh, fucking sweet." That was a weight off everyone's shoulders. And people who were dealing with ballot access last year, those lawsuits were a fucking nightmare. The petitions were even worse. But I fucking threw a celebratory. If you aren't familiar with the Crypto 6, Ian Freeman, go to thecrypto6.com. Check out Ian Freeman, one of our good friends over in Keene, New Hampshire. He had a mild disagreement with the federal government over what Bitcoin is, and they're trying to land him several life sentences in prison for racketeering and money laundering and all sorts of things. But the judge that's overseeing his trial is Judge LaPlante, the guy who laughed when I called the state's attorney an idiot. So,
oh, nice. Wow, that's good. That's good news.
Right. All right. Moving
I
on.
don't know
However,
Ian personally, but that's I don't want him to go to jail for crypto.
Yeah. And if you do follow Libertarian Radio News, LRN.FM, you can catch our regular show over on LRN FM moving forward. However, Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays. However, there exists the danger that in a collective panic, the protection of basic liberties guaranteed in the constitutions will be abrogated by emergency measures. No shit. And the judiciary will succumb to the mass hysteria. Yeah, okay, so the judges get crazy, failing to lift the repressive interventions. The empirical
or refusing to even see it. You know, like this is my biggest problem with the Supreme Court is so often they're just like, we don't want to work. You know, like the judicial branch of the government is like, we're going to reject this. We're not interested in looking at this case. Like, you filed your paperwork wrong. We're not going to give you an opinion on that one. Like, wow, that's messed up. Like, you guys really are the backbone of you guys are the actual. I mean, considering everyone else could be politically very biased, you guys are theoretically supposed to be the ones that are avoiding that, right? Your judges supposed to be the impartial. You know, politicians obviously aren't impartial. But like judges are supposed to be impartial. I don't know. It's gross. It's like wicked unfortunate that they're the group of people that try to do the least work in our government. I'm like, judges, if anybody, you could hope.
All right. So the empirical evidence during the COVID-19 crisis demonstrates, again, they keep coming back to empirical evidence in the COVID-19 crisis, but earlier they said they weren't going to examine it. Demonstrates that basic liberties were not defended in the welfare states. COVID and constitutional roadkill. Again, that sounds like a fucking blog. In general,
it probably is. Constitutional roadkill definitely is a blog.
Yeah. The greater the coercive power of the state, the more harm can be inflicted on society in a mass hysteria. It can be argued that infection with a virus would constitute a negative technological external effect. Vegas neurosystem. So he's also citing himself. Vegas is one of the authors of this article, and they keep citing shit that he wrote. I don't know the rules on scholarly and academic fucking writing, but like it seems it's like retweeting yourself almost. It's just kind of passe, don't do it. All right. However, the only task of a minimal state is to protect private property rights. It is not the task of the minimal state to protect its citizens against all risks of life, such as getting a cold or the seasonal flu. Nozick, Anarchy State Utopia. Fucking fantastic read. Everyone should go read it. Don't read his second book. Only read his first book. His second book is garbage. He becomes a communist. But his first book is incredible. In a minimal state, citizens are free to decide which risks they want to assume, be they driving a car, doing bungee jumping, or engaging in social interaction. They're calling engaging in social interaction a risk, but earlier we have defined that engagement in social reaction is a necessity for the mental well-being and mental health of individuals who are engaging in it. Because we're a social species, we're human beings, we are animals, we are social, tribal animals. Engaging in social interaction is necessary for your health.
Philip Vegas works for the Mises Institute.
That fucking explains it. All right. that explains so much.
They are self-retweeting.
Yeah.
Wait, so the Mises Institute has infiltrated the NIH?
Don't give anyone ideas. All right. Where were we? Indeed, the states attempted to reduce infection rates in the form of mandatory face masks. I can't wait till we get to the funding section. In the form of mandatory face masks, the shutdown of businesses or shelter-in-place orders does violate the private property rights that a minimal state is supposed to defend and may produce negative externalities in form of depressions, alcoholism, or suicides. This is published in January. I called last year. I was like, F's in chat for Bill. He's got the Rona.
Yep. I'm dying.
I predicted last year that we were going to see a huge spike in suicides. I'm like, it's going to be huge, massive. These lockdowns are going to destroy mental health. People are going to be crushed. The economic disaster is going to have rippling side effects that is going to destroy people. That was my honest prediction. This was predicted in January. This was written in January before the statistics came out. These statistics came out recently. Guess what? Suicides are down.
Are they really?
They are way down.
I didn't know that.
Yeah, it's mind blowing. I can't reason as to why.
Well, because if you want to kill yourself, you just go out without a mask, dude.
It might be. It might have been the UBI. It might have been the actual raw, unfettered socialism and redistribution of wealth. Because sure, we shut down the economy, but we gave everyone a fucking paycheck while we were at it. Like nothing got produced. Nobody built new houses.
That'll only backfire a little bit.
Yeah, no, it's going to backfire for generations to come. But like I'm thinking about it, like how much of it was people like being given all this time off to do things and not and like actually being given the opportunity to invest in themselves, take some classes online, learn about like maybe there was some positive outcome to COVID. I wrote an article on LinkedIn the other day. I think there was an incredibly positive outcome to COVID in the professional work environment, with work from home becoming the new norm. We're no longer investing in offices. We're investing in stable, reliable internet connections because people can work from home. They don't need to be in the office. They don't need to be micromanaged. But
yeah, that's good for everybody. That's good for the employees. Yeah. It's good for the employers. You know, you save money on office space. You save. It's
good for the carbon emissions if you're not commuting to fucking work anymore.
Yeah, it's good for everybody.
Yeah, it's incredible. It's an incredible positive side effect that's come out of COVID. The only thing I'm wondering is like maybe the mass influx of cash and UBI and unrestricted money to allow people to live without having to work for a period of time and to explore other interests, avenues, art, research, hobbies. Like maybe there was a huge short-term benefit, but the economic downturn is going to be massive for generations.
I would be curious, right? Because suicides are just one number, and I don't know. I don't know for sure, but like, look, you know, we're both around Manchester. When I go around Manchester, there's definitely twice as many homeless people as there were before COVID. Like, definitely.
Blame Concord for that.
I mean, I know there's like externalities within the state of New Hampshire that play into that, but like in other places too, there's definitely more homeless people. So it could be. And like I don't know. It could be that people's lives are worse. Like, oh, I can't afford to.
I can't afford to kill myself.
I wasn't going to say that. Most people, I don't think, are going to kill themselves. You know, like I think most people.
No, it's the reality. I can't afford to kill myself. A lot of people are like, I'm so fucking depressed. I'm so fucking miserable. But like, I can't afford to kill myself. Like, fucking Jesus fucking Christ. The schools are closed. Nobody's going to take care of the kids. Nobody's going to feed the fucking kids. Nobody's going to pay off this mortgage. The kids are going to be left with the fucking debt. I can't afford to kill myself. It is a real fucking thing now. Fucking wild.
Yeah, I guess what I was saying there though is like it could be that people there's bad effects that happen to people in between, like getting some money and like getting some free money and killing themselves, or that like it's not even like a only one direction that could lead to. Is like I don't mean that getting free money will make you kill yourself. Just the idea that you can't go to work, you can't participate in society, etc. You know, of course people are going to be depressed, but I think that rather than leading directly to suicides, we could still be on like the road towards people's lives spiraling out of control. And perhaps if there are going to be suicides from this, they haven't really hit yet. And I don't know. I'm speculating here. I don't know. It just seems to me like there's more people who are homeless for sure. There's more people who are out of jobs for sure. Though I think there's also more jobs, weirdly. But
all right. Well, in a private law society, in a minimal state, there are mechanisms that help limit and reduce mass panics. Collective hysteria may be exacerbated by a powerful welfare state for several reasons. Now, I think we get into their arguments of how the state did it. Okay.
Yes.
First, the state has the power to diminish and prohibit those activities that do reduce fear and anxiety, such as sports, diversion, and socializing. It's weird. So now that I'm getting the realization that this article is really put together by the Mises Institute, and libertarians, like I think I've come to the conclusion, and I'm sure it's going to be confirmed in the funding section, but they're right here arguing for bread and circuses. Like the Mises Institute is arguing for bread and circuses is necessary to stop mass panic and hysteria. Rome is falling. If you don't give people the Colosseum, they'll tear it down even faster.
You're kind of not wrong.
Yeah. First, the state has the power to diminish and prohibit those activities that do reduce fear and anxiety, such as sports, diversion, and socialization. During the COVID-19 crisis, states used their coercive power to impose social isolation, thereby contributing to anxiety. Psychological consequences of social isolation during the COVID-19 outbreak by Peter Bassa and Simpson. And psychological strain, both ingredients that spur mass hysteria in order to shield against biopsychological infections. That's a new word. I like it. The population should exercise regularly, have quality sleep, They say exercise regularly twice a year. Somebody should fire their editor.
No, you should do it twice. You should definitely do that twice a day.
How they balance nutrition and maintain strong connection with other people.
And exercise regularly.
Governments around the world mandated lockdowns and masks during COVID-19 crisis, making it more difficult for citizens to do any of these things. More specifically, social distancing imposed by governments reduces strong social connections, and mandatory masks prevent the expressing friendliness and compassion, thereby decreasing psychological resilience. Citing, I'm not going to pronounce that fucking word, okay? I'm assuming if the title is using a word that's just too many syllables and for me to pronounce that it's academic. Second,
psychoneuroimmunity. Come on, it's no big deal.
Sure. The state, by its very nature, takes a centralized approach to solving problems. It is true that the welfare state is not necessarily a complete centralized state. The USA and the Federal Republic of Germany, both of which are welfare states, have substantial federal structures, and these federal structures can lead to competition in regulations and in dealing with the source of a mass hysteria, which leads to better solutions. Moreover, the existence of competing states on the international level allows experimenting with different solutions. During the COVID-19 crisis, for instance, the approach of Sweden provided evidence of the results of alternative approaches. The Rona squeeze and Swedish hip hopper. That's okay. It's Jeffrey fucking Tucker. That sounded like a blog, but I saw the fucking citation of Jeffrey Tucker.
Yeah, you are.
So, like, okay, sure. Decentralize the political structure and the more intense possible competition.
I want to say, by the way, the American Institute for Economic Research is a solid source.
Sure, but like it's hard to take Jeffrey Tucker seriously when he once compared me and my friends hanging out at Porkfest to an opium den.
Have you been to Porkfest?
Have you been to an opium den?
No, actually no. So that's a good point.
I had questions about Jeffrey Tucker, though, what an opium den is.
Jeff Tucker is a fun guy.
He also thought I was black.
Well,
yeah. Jeffrey Tucker, like, mind you, I've met Jeffrey Tucker dozens of times. I've had long conversations with Jeffrey Tucker at fundraisers and LP events, Porkfest, Liberty Forums. He never fucking remembers anyone except pretty blonde girls. Those are the only people he remembers. But yeah, that Porkfest where he said, like, he walked in and said, "This reminds me of an opium den." Oh, really? And then, like, we got to talking, and some of Jess Mears came up in conversation. Jess called me later that night. She's like, "Jeffrey Tucker said he met my black friend Justin. Was that you?" I'm like, "Are you fucking kidding me?"
That's so funny.
Like, I'm not black.
That's so funny.
All right.
You're probably the closest you've ever been to a black person. No, it's probably not true.
In any case, the state, by its very nature, deals with the source of a hysteria, such as the perceived threat of a deadly virus, in a centralized way. The state is the monopolist of coercion in a given territory. Rothbard, Anatomy of the State. Thanks, Jack. Wait, they're actually citing that they got the copy of Rothbard's Anatomy of the State from the Mises Institute.
That's awesome.
As the state imposes its solution to the problem, there is no or only very limited experimentation of alternative ways to solve the problem. People that oppose the state's approach to the problem because they have not succumbed to the hysteria are suppressed. They cannot demonstrate alternative ways to solve the crisis, as these alternative ways are prohibited by the state.
This is, by the way, censorship. This is like exactly what you see. This is, I mean, they're doing the educated way of talking about how if you're doing things that are outside the standard prescribed guidelines about COVID, or if you're questioning things the wrong way, they're going to reduce the reach in the algorithm. They're going to take your platform offline. They'll do whatever they can because those lines of questioning are not allowed. This is just smart people talking for that.
All right. State of solution is no or limited experimentation, alternative ways to solve the problem. People that oppose the state's approach to the problem because they have not succumbed to the hysteria are suppressed. Yes. That's huge. Like, I'm just waiting to see if we go down. I got this open up in another browser. We're not down yet, but there's a chance.
Yeah, it could take a while. It could be like you're reading this. We're not really saying anything about what to do or not do. You know, it could be that this is in the safe zone. I don't know.
We haven't mentioned the V word yet, so
no, God no.
Okay. They cannot demonstrate alternative ways to solve the crisis, as these alternative ways are prohibited by the state. When alternatives are ruled out, groupthink increases. Groupthink, God, they're using the word, that's such a Mises word, groupthink. Groupthink is a psychological force that fosters consensus, suppressing dissent, and the evaluation of alternatives to the collective narrative. Groupthink has been considered responsible for political fiascos such as the Vietnam War or the Watergate cover-up by Irving Janis. Victims of groupthink, Houghton. Lockdowns during the COVID-19 crisis may be another fiasco candidate as their effectiveness is disputed. Country-level analysis, that looks academic. Okay. Written by a German person, so I'm sure it's academic. Group pressure can modify and distort judgments and has been shown by the Ash experiments. They misspelled Ash's name.
I want to look those up.
Effects of group pressure on the modification and distortion of judgments. But they misspelled Ash's name in the article.
Yeah.
The human inclination toward conformity aids hysteria spread. Indeed, groupthink helps to explain the phenomenon of mass hysteria. Collaborative irrationality, Akriska. Mass hysteria can be considered a form of groupthink. I feel like they're repeating themselves here a lot. Due to the group pressure of groupthink, using that word over and over again is actually really distracting. Hysteria feeds itself as no alternatives are shown to people. The information necessary to address the problems cannot be generated in a decentralized way in the market, which is a problem inherent with socialism. Third, in a modern welfare state, the media may be politicized. This is where we're going. All right. This is the big deal. In a modern welfare
two
state,
paragraphs are good, yeah.
Yeah, in a modern welfare state, the media may be politicized. I don't think this has anything to do with the welfare state. I think this has a lot to do with the state. Like, it doesn't have to be a welfare state. Even, I don't think this has to do even with the state. I think this has to do with the interconnectedness, interconnectivity of human beings and the advancements of technology that we have made, the internet, mass media, television, broadcast. We are so connected and we are so exposed to media that I don't think the state can stop this short of state-controlled media. And I don't think the state should stop it. It's not the state's role. It's competition on the market's role. But, like, you're going to have division in media. And, all right, we're going to keep on. Third, in a modern welfare state, the media may be politicized. The politicization restricts the existing competition between the media. That's not true. It, like, right now, it doesn't restrict the competition in the media. We have how many fucking podcasts, like how many different YouTube channels, Odyssey channels, BitChute channels, how many different sources of non-mainstream media exist? It's a matter of what's mainstream, and what's mainstream isn't actually determined by the state. What's mainstream is determined by the will of the masses and what they accept as mainstream. News outlets and social media platforms may develop close relationships with the state. That is absolutely true and terrifying. The state regulation.
Like if they started this paragraph with third in a powerful state or whatever, you know, like they could have started this paragraph with anything besides welfare state, and it would have been easier to. But yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, Robert. Yes, we're into the meat and potatoes now. The state regulates media. It may also own media outlets directly, such as public TV and radio channels. The state typically also requires licenses for certain media to operate. In general, that's where you get. I don't think we're at that level yet. We're not at the state requiring a license to broadcast yet. To broadcast, yes, on open airwaves, but not to, like, that's when we get into totalitarian China, is when the state determines what is and is not journalism.
Yeah, you need a license to publish. You know, you need a license to put your article out, or a license to. Oh, you're not qualified to spread information that you believe. You know, we don't know that you're a verified source of truth.
Yeah, we're clearly not at that level yet. We're not at that level yet, as evidenced by the fact that the National Institute of Health published this article.
Right, we're like 2 or 3 clicks away.
Yeah. In general, new outlets and platforms may look for the goodwill of state agencies. Moreover, government officials are often used as a source of news, leading to statist bias. They use the word statist, folks. While objectivity would require presenting both sides of the story, in time of crisis, politicians often present both sides of the story.
I'm going to do very dirty things with this article, by the way, later.
While objectivity would require presenting both sides of the story, in times of crisis, politicians often present both. They need a better fucking proofreader over at the Mises Institute. Somebody fucking call them up and ask if they're hiring.
You mean at the National Institute of Health? At the National Institute of Health, they need a better proofreader.
Yeah. Another form of indirect state influence in the media is that they are staffed with people who were educated in state or state licensed schools, reinforcing the statist bias in media. News agencies and social media platforms connected with the state may engage in and promote massive negative news campaigns.
I like to call that
by NBC, ABC. We call that an election here.
I like to call that the CIA to CNN pipeline.
We call it. It's an election year. That's what we call it. An election year in New Hampshire. Negative news sells. No shit, Sherlock. The media have an incentive to portray danger. If it bleeds, it leads. The story of government as a hero who provides a resolution to threats is very marketable. According to
that's a big point. Can't be underlined enough.
News media incentives, coverage of government, and the growth of government.
The first week of the pandemic, so like libertarianism is dead. It's official. Like that's definitely big government marketing itself right there.
Citation: the Cato Institute.
Wait, get that dirty name out of here.
All right. In fact,
that's it. Whole article's trash.
No. I was citing libertarianism is dead. Citation: Cato Institute.
Oh.
Yeah. In fact, mass media spread by panic, presenting the SARS-CoV-2 as an unprecedented threat. Shares Mikhailovka. This is a Russian article. The linguist philosophers investigate. Okay. Information seeking on the internet was associated with more symptoms during COVID-19 crisis. Information seeking. All right, you guys don't go to WebMD. Never go to fucking WebMD.
It actually makes you sicker.
Like, you go to WebMD, you type in whatever fucking symptoms you have. It's like, I got a fucking headache and a sore throat. It's like, you have lymphoma. Like, what? WebMD does not fucking tell you accurate information. WebMD is a tool to get you to go see a doctor. If you have fucking concerns about your health, call your fucking doctor. If you don't have a doctor, get a doctor. Don't use the emergency room as your fucking form of primary care. It's not good for you. Definitely don't use the internet to diagnose you. I trust my cat more than I trust WebMD. All right. Google MD is even worse. Being reminded and made aware of one's own mortality constantly produced anxiety. You're all going to die. Deal with it. Live with it. Everybody dies. Nothing you can do about it. Emotional pictures of coffins, mass graves, and patients on ventilators contributed to the collective fear. I haven't seen a picture of a mass grave since like week 2 of the pandemic, and that was in Italy. Like, was there mass graves anywhere but Italy?
Dude, not that I know of, and also even in Italy, like that seems like they really could have just like waited a little bit, you know? Like they could. Yeah, like, it seems like that was probably not necessary.
Yeah,
I don't know. I could be wrong. Like only in one place. Like what are they like? Are they just that packed there? They have no cemeteries. Like what's going on in Italy? They can't.
WebMD is a nocebo. Oh, I think it was one of the river cities. Like a lot of Italy is built on fucking stilts and like elevated like groundings.
Oh, so there is nowhere to bury people.
Yeah. All right.
Yeah, I guess that makes sense.
They have miles of catacombs where people like fucking 100-year-old skeletons just in catacombs. Like,
oh, so they already have mass graves. Like that's just standards.
Yeah, I guess. Okay. All right. In fact, mass media spread panic by presenting SARS-CoV-2 as an unprecedented threat. Information seeking made people sicker. Being reminded in pictures of coffins, mass graves, and patients on ventilators contributed to the collective fear. An excess of COVID-19 news generated anxiety and panic, according to a letter to the editor.
That's
okay. Like we're citing a letter to the editor. Also called headline stress disorder. Stanzi, overcoming headline stress disorder in Psychology Today. Negative social media news generated psychological stress that was unknown in former times and is well suited to cause mass hysteria. Sahi Singh, role of media and outcome of mass hysteria. Social media consumption correlates with anxiety and psychological distress. Kills McRae and Grealish, a systemic review of the influence of social media on depression, anxiety, and psychological stress in adolescence.
That seems legit.
Yeah. No, there's a whole movie about it on Netflix. Excessive discussion on the COVID-19 on social media deteriorated psychic health. Psychic or psychological? Again, with the editing people.
No, they mean they can't sense the spirits as well, dude.
The Indians... No. No.
I'm out of tune with the other world.
No, the fucking rocks aren't going to save you. You can't pray to the spirits of fucking geodes.
I'm sorry, young man. I can't read your future today. The COVID is thick.
Yeah. News coverage of COVID-19 was almost completely negative. News on increasing COVID-19 cases outnumbered stories of declining cases by a factor of 5.5. Even in times of falling cases, news agencies may actually intentionally scare people. Sacerdote, Siegel, and Cook. Why is all COVID-19 news bad news? NEBR, Cambridge, Massachusetts, a local news station. All right. I'm familiar with that news station. And earlier, Rosenthal's, it's time to scare people about COVID.
Yeah, they get into that more later, too. Listen, they get into that more later, too. Give it like 2 more paragraphs. There's more.
All right. And suppress alternative information. In short, mass hysteria sponsored by biased media sector may run out of control in a modern welfare state. In a modern state. They need to cut the word welfare out of this article altogether. Fourth, negative news from an authoritative source produces anxiety and is particularly harmful for psychological health. Experts that endorse the credibility of a threat increase the spread of mass hysteria. YouTube will take down misinformation. Oh, well, they finally got around to doing this. I didn't know YouTube said they were going to do this in January. They just started the purge like 2 days ago. All right. Many people, especially in times of crisis, look for help from the modern state. They attach great authority to the representatives of the state and to the warnings of state institutions. When doctors such as Anthony Fauci speak in the name of the state, telling people they face a terrible threat and have to wear masks and stay home, it becomes easier for collective hysteria to develop than would be the case in a more decentralized society where no such powerful central authority exists. Indeed, Dr. Fauci exaggerated the danger of COVID-19, delivering a message of panic to the public.
By the way,
blew up the
this
world.
is where YouTube yanks the channel. Go ahead.
All right, and on that, everybody, make sure before we get into this that you do follow the link in the description to our new landing page at O'Donnell4Liberty.com. Check out the other links to where else you can find this and subscribe on Odyssey. In a U.S. congressional hearing on 11 March 2020, the mortality rate of the coronavirus was exaggerated. Information bias and selection bias led to the estimation that the mortality rate of the coronavirus would be 10 times higher than the mortality rate of seasonal influenza. There was a confusion about the case fatality rate, which is the proportion of deaths amongst confirmed cases of a disease, and the infection fatality rate, which is the proportion of deaths relative to the prevalence of infections within a population. Estimations of infection fatality rates are based on blood tests. Estimated infections include undiagnosed, unsymptomatic, and mild infections. The infection fatality rate is normally much lower than the case fatality rate. In a congressional hearing on 11 March 2020, the infection fatality rate of the seasonal influenza was compared to the estimated case fatality rate of the coronavirus, leading to the alarming statement that the coronavirus would be 10 times more deadly than the seasonal influenza. Public health lessons learned from biases in coronavirus mortality overestimation, Brown RB, disaster medical public health preparation. This false statement coming out of the Congress of the United States and with its authority greatly contributed to generate anxiety and panic.
There's also a great article about that. I think it's called The Decimal Point That Changed the World. You can look up. I don't remember who it's by.
It was the previous citation.
Oh, was it?
It is The Decimal Point. It's available. It's AER. It's Jeffrey Tucker.
Okay, yeah. Okay, yeah. That's a great article on that. So, yeah, carry on.
Another factor that may make the modern societies more receptible to mass hysteria is the role of religion in a society that's been reduced. All right, I'm going to take a hard swing of the bat at fucking Mises Institute if they start trying to pitch religion as the fucking savior here.
Well, I don't know that they're pitching it as a savior so much as, I mean, keep reading because they have like a whole, they make a pretty solid case here.
The fear of death is usually alleviated by religion because of religions typically consider that there is a life after death. The state and democracy has been elevated to a quasi-religious level. The state appears an alternative to God, citing Huerta de Soto, Anarchy God, and Pope Francis, without the promise of an afterlife. When turning away from religion, people start to fear death more, and a strong fear of death is another factor that contributes to pandemics, disorders, and mass hysteria.
I mean, that's hard to disagree with. That's hard. I'm not a religious person. That's hard to disagree with.
I'm going to finish the fucking paragraph.
It's like, dude, listen, the number of people. the number of people who would have said, "Do you want me to read this one?" The number of people would have said, like, I don't care, like, if I die, let me see my family, God will judge me afterwards. Like, that's a fucking thing. It's like, I don't believe in God, but I believe in seeing your family, and if God gets you there, that's cool with me.
As Eric von Leden has put it, it is difficult to fear death if one is very pious. It is difficult not to worship health if one fears death. It is difficult to enforce general health without large-scale state intervention, and it is equally difficult to imagine increased state intervention without a loss of liberties. Fight from Dubai. Nocebo effects make you feel pain.
That guy definitely is going from like if you fear death,
he's going hard in the paint.
Yeah. He's really going one step after the other. From if you're afraid to die, it's probably because you're not free enough.
Yeah. This does not mean that strong states never rely on religion. The authoritarian regimes of the interwar period, such as Austria, with Dolf and Schönberg and Poland and Pilsudski or Franco's Spain, relied on religion and the characteristics of welfare states. However, empirical research found that in countries with higher welfare spending, people are less religious, suggesting that individuals substitute religious services for state services. Gil, Lundsgaard, state welfare spending, and religiosity. Religious beliefs, however, have been shown to increase psychological well-being, religion, health, and psychological well-being. Without a spiritual framework provided by religion and a belief in the afterlife, there is a tendency for fear of death to increase, for the population to become more responsive to psychological problems of mass hysteria. All right, we need an Ayn Rand in here. Paging Ayn Rand. Where's Mark Pellegrino when you need him?
We're getting there. We're getting there.
Fucking, this is some bullshit. Like,
dude, so this next paragraph is where it gets really wild. And it's like...
But this fucking obsession with religion is just utter and absolute bullshit. It's not religion that keeps people from fearing death. It's not religion that keeps people from fearing death. It's the lack of fulfillment. It's people who feel that their lives haven't been fulfilled. People who feel like they haven't left a lasting legacy, whether it be economic, whether it be children, whether it be something else. It doesn't need to be fucking religious. To harp back on religion, if you've accepted a master other than yourself, then you are not free. And religion is the accepting of masters. And organized religion is responsible. And religion is responsible for more suffering and more damage in human history than any other force save government. And there have been periods, even today, where it is impossible to distinguish between the state and religion because the state is religion and religion is the state. I am an atheist. I'll be fucking militant about it. I'll bring Mark Pellegrino back on to talk about this fucking paragraph alone. If you call yourself a fucking... I'm going to piss off people in chat. I'm going to piss off people on Twitter, but no.
You're pissing me off, Justin. I'm not here for this religion bashing. I'm agnostic. Come on, let's go. Let's go. We got hysteria to take on.
This is the problem with fucking paleo-conservative and fucking neoconservative fucking nonsense is they keep defaulting back to Christian conservative.
Dude, it's one paragraph where they mentioned that if people were less afraid of death, they'd be less worried about like all this other hysteria that's going on because like if I die, I die. At least I get to see my family, and it's like that's a real thing. And you know what? They're not saying people.
Life's a bitch. They're not pitching die.
They're not pitching like a return to tradition or something here. They're literally just like another factor that may make modern societies more susceptible to mass hysterias is that the role of religion in society has been reduced. That makes sense to me.
Fuck religion. Fifth.
All right.
The state may actively want to instill fear in the population, thereby contributing to the making of mass hysteria. The prince. Is it better to be feared or loved? If you can't be loved, you might as well be feared.
Hold on, can I read that one? Can I read that one out loud again? The state may actively want to instill fear in the population, thereby contributing to the making of mass hysteria. And then, dude, this is so rich. This is ridiculous. And this is from our era. It's from the COVID times. It's from right now. And this is like, well, they were literally doing that in Germany behind closed doors.
Well, I mean, it's not a novel concept. The state may actually want to instill fear in the population. This is not a novel concept. And I haven't checked the citation yet, but the citation I would use is Machiavelli. Like Machiavelli wrote, this is the playbook for governance. You rather be ruled by fear or ruled by love. If ruling by being loved and it's too difficult for the population to love you, you must make sure that they fear you. All right.
Yeah.
Illustrating this point is the leakage of an internal paper of the German Department of Interior during the first weeks of the COVID-19 crisis, citing German. Really fucking German. Okay, those are too many fucking vowels in a word. In the paper, the state experts recommend that the government should instill fear in the German population. In order to spread fear, the paper endorsed 3 communication strategies. First, the state authorities should stress the breathing problems of COVID-19 patients because human beings have a primordial fear of death by suffocation. Brain's Fear Center has built-in suffocation center.
How sneaky
Anxiety,
is that?
sensitivity. Here's the thing, dude. Like, I have an actual phobia of suffocation and issues dealing to a time where I was caught in a burning truck and PTSD, and I like wearing a mask freaked me the fuck out. If I had to wear a mask for more than like 20 minutes, I started to hyperventilate and freak out. So I don't think it works. It's contradictory, at least to me, which can easily trigger panic, false suffocation, alarms, spontaneous panics, and related conditions, and integrative hypothesis. Second, the experts emphasized that fear should also be instilled in children, even though it's do it for the children. You got to fuck up the children to save the children, even though there was next to no risk to children's own health. However, the children can easily get infected by meeting and playing with other children. According to the report, children should be told that when they infect their parents and grandparents in turn, they could suffer a distressful death at home. You killed grandma, Timmy!
Yep, they're literally saying that you should let kids know that if they hang out with their friends, they might kill grandma.
Oh, wow.
Like, kids... Listen, it's like, I don't think you should tell kids if you're stressed about your bills and you don't know if you can feed them next week. Like, I know, like, you want to be tight with your kids, but, like, your kids don't need to bear those burdens. Like, that's on you. Like, that's I don't know. The same thing is, like, telling them about how they might spread disease to grandma, which, like, again, little to no risk. We don't even know. It seems like, and this isn't in the study, they're not even, like, a good vector for it, like, to spread it.
Yeah.
But that's just admittedly they're like, even though there's no risk to them, we should make sure that the fear is instilled in them. That, like, openly, they said that was part of the plan, is to also instill the same level of fear in kids.
Jesus Christ. This communication advice intended to invoke anxiety and feelings of guilt. Instilling guilt is another measure used by governments to make the population more supportive. From Gottfried's Multiculturalism in the Politics of Guilt from the University of Missouri. The recommended message instills fear of being responsible for infecting others who die a distressful death. Third, the German government was advised to mention the possibility of unknown long-term irreversible health damage caused by SARS-CoV-2 infection and the possibility of a sudden unexpected death of people who were infected.
This was a huge point they kept saying in the very beginning. They're talking about long COVID. It's like, guys, nobody's had this disease for a long term. Yeah. Like, we just don't know how long it's going to affect you for. It's like, yeah, you don't know if it's going to be over in 2 weeks. It's literally brand new, you know? Yeah. But I guess you can just claim, this is the whole thing, you can claim any unknown, like, negative effect that you don't know. Well, we don't know if it makes all your hair fall out for the next 3 years. We just don't know if, you know, it's like, you know what? You don't know, but you don't have any evidence to suggest that it does, but you don't know. So you play your I don't know that this doesn't happen card to scare people. Sorry, go on.
All these communication recommendations were intended to increase fear in the population. Fear at the end is an important foundation of a government's power. As Henry Mencken, they're quoting fucking Mencken. The whole aim of practical politics is to keep the populace alarmed and hence clamorous to be led to safety by an endless series of hobgoblins, most of them imaginary. Of course, it was Defensive Woman that they're citing. If y'all are familiar with Mencken, you should give Mencken a read if you fucking can tolerate, like, pure and unadulterated misogyny wrapped up in a pseudo-paleo-conservative libertarian. The overreaction of government to a perceived threat then fosters anxiety. It lies in the interests of a government to emphasize its citizens' vulnerability to external and internal threats because the state's legitimacy and power rest on the narrative that it protects its citizens against such dangers. While these threat strategy is generally beneficial to the government, fear is a double-edged sword. Fear can also turn against the state. Panic and mass hysteria can even lead to total destabilization of a regime. Anecdotal evidence of this is the Grand Peur during the French Revolution, when rumors of aristocrats planning to starve the population led to general panic uprisings against the regime. Bring back guillotines.
Dude, imagine if one text message like that leaked.
Bring back guillotines. Like, that's all I gotta say. We might be seeing the exact like inverse of this with the protests in Australia. Like, maybe it's the point the government lockdowns reached a point where they're panicking people about being locked down, and that's the panic response in Australia. Is the mass uprising is against the regime. Like, you get mass protests of thousands of people storming police lines. You got one dude, I'm guessing is a rugby player, who takes out 7 cops in 5
Dude, that was wild.
Minutes. Yeah. Like,
not 2 minutes, like 15 seconds, dude.
Yeah.
Or less.
Yeah.
It's like slow motion, it's 15 seconds.
The fear and anxiety have been an important factor in human evolution and have an important function. However, the evolutionary function of fear can be manipulated to secure dominion and control. Fear gives over the fearful. The relationship between politics and fear is widely studied. Robin C. Fear and the History of Political Idea. Social Theory and Fear. Rutledge. All right. The ancient Greek historian Polybius claimed that in order to control the masses, rulers had to instill fear and work with horror images. The Roman writer Sallust pointed out that those who want to exercise power have to decide between generating fear or suffering from fear.
Wow.
In recent times,
that's literally like when the people fear the rulers, there is tyranny, and when the rulers fear the people, there's peace or whatever.
In recent times, the war against terror has been evoked by some authors as an example of reinforcing excessive fears in the population in order to increase government's power. Brzezinski points out constant reference to a war on terror did accomplish one major objective. It stimulated the emergence of a culture of fear. Fear obscures reason, intensifies emotions, and makes it easier for demagogic politicians to mobilize the public on behalf of policies they want to pursue. A culture of fear results from the government instilling fear on the general public to achieve its political goals, exploiting the negativity bias of the human brain. Typically, governments are helped in their threat narrative by the media. As Robert Higgs points out, the news media buy insurance against government retribution by playing along with whatever program of fear-mongering the government is conducting currently. Citing Higgs, are fear the foundation of every government's power. Again, it's just Machiavellian bullshit. Sensationalist media also support the government's fear strategy because they allow it to get the public's attention. The combination of a state willing to use the fear strategy with supportive mass media provides fertile grounds for mass hysteria to develop, with negative effects on public health. 6, politicians have an incentive to overshoot the mark in their response to a threat. This is because politicians are largely exempt from the risk of possible wrong decisions and their costs. Hans Hermann Hoppe. They're citing Hans Hermann Hoppe.
Dude, they cited Friedman back there too.
Yeah. Hoppe the fuck back on out of here. Political decision makers can largely pass on the costs of their actions to others. Additionally, the larger, more centralized a state is, the better and more extensively the costs can be passed on to others.
By the way, the others is like the citizens.
Man Economy State with Power and Market, Ludwig von Mises Institute, Murray Rothbard, and Hans Hermann Hoppe, The Theory of Socialism and Capitalism. Self-interested politicians. They're citing just
again.
I wonder. I'm really curious why this needs a citation. Self-interested politicians. Ludwig von Mises Bureaucracy. And,
I will say they're not skimping on citing their research, though. They're not skimping.
On citing themselves. Ferrero, the Fatal Conceit of Public Policy, Can Austrians and Public Choice Economics complement each other? Self-interested politicians face an asymmetric payoff. Underestimating a threat and failing to act has great political cost, as politicians will be held responsible for the disaster caused by the threat they underestimated. By contrast, an exaggeration or even an intervention of state and bold state intervention are politically more attractive. If the existential threat claimed by politicians really turns out to be such a great danger, they can be celebrated as heroes if they enact bold measures. If the costs of these measures ultimately turn out to be excessive compared to the actual danger, then the politicians do not have to bear the costs of wrong decision, but can pass it on to the rest of the population.
Or they can just say that it wasn't that bad because they did that thing.
Right. Politicians enjoying a guaranteed income therefore have an incentive to exaggerate a danger and to expose exaggerated measures, also called policy overreaction, citing Mayer and Meyer, which is conducive to the emergence of growth mass hysteria. In some, property rights tend not to be effective limits in curbing mass hysteria in a welfare state. Moreover, the state may inhibit the natural mechanisms that reduce stress and hysteria.
Wouldn't that be because property rights don't really exist very well in a welfare state? Like they almost don't.
Yeah, I'm leaning that way. The centralized nature of the state increases group and conformity pressures. Politicized mass media and negativity messages from the official state agencies can further increase psychological pressure. Finally, the state may intentionally want to increase anxiety, and politicians have the incentive to make bold decisions and exaggerate the threat. Our findings are summarized in Table 3. Table 3. Factors influencing the evolution of mass hysteria in a minimal state, in a welfare state. A whole bunch of allegations that can't actually be backed up with historical evidence because there's never really been a minimal state that kept records. Conclusions. All right. How long is conclusions?
It's not long.
All right. We're almost there, folks. Thank you for sticking with us. Robert, you're the real MVP in chat. The real Triple H is Hans Hermann Hoppe. You got that right. All right. Isn't Triple H making a comeback?
I think so, yeah. At least culturally. If not actually wrestling. I don't think
I think it was like Triple H is making a comeback wrestling, and he like released a shirt announcing his comeback.
Is he really going to wrestle again?
I don't know, but like whatever it was, if that was the fucking shirt, I gotta find the design, like making a comeback, and I'm gonna make it a Hans Hermann Hoppe design.
That's a great idea.
Mass hysteria can have enormous public health costs in terms of psychological stress, anxiety, and even physical symptoms. To these costs must be added indirect adverse health effects from alcoholism, suicides, or damage from deferred treatment and delayed recognition of illness. Policy failures in mass hysteria can lead to economic decline and poverty, which in turn negatively impacts public health and life expectancy. Studies of mass hysteria have mostly focused on outbreaks in localized settings of schools or businesses. However, in the digital age of global and mass social media, the possibility of global mass hysteria exists. Yeah, regardless of the state, it's going to exist because of social media. A phenomenon has not yet been studied. Yes, it has. All right. The Arab Spring is the example they're looking for, where Egyptians use Twitter and social media to stir up a hysterical revolt against the Egyptian government, and they put into place of the democratically elected Egyptian government a military junta. Our study of the political economy of mass hysteria draws on the well-established psychological phenomenon of mass hysteria and applies it to new and innovative context of global mass hysteria for which no literature exists yet. More specifically, we analyzed how the political system can influence the likelihood and spread of mass hysteria in a digitized and globalized world based on economic principles. We discussed how the state and its size increased the likelihood of mass hysteria by comparing an idealized minimal state with an idealized welfare state, addressing a previously completely unexplored research question. Our findings are highly relevant and important are highly relevant and important because the policy failures induced by mass hysteria are potentially catastrophic for public health. We found that the size and power of the state contributes positively to the likelihood and extensions of mass hysteria. The more centralized and more power a state has, the higher the probability and extension of mass hysteria. In a minimal state, there exist self-correcting mechanisms that limit collective hysteria. Their enforcement of private property rights limits the harm inflicted by those who succumb to hysteria. The state, thanks to a fuzzy public sector and its soft power.
Well, think about it. A lot of times, a lot of the stuff they've done throughout this pandemic has been soft power.
All right. By contrast, amplifies and exacerbates mass panics, potentially causing important havoc. We are temporarily, locally limited, isolated outbreaks of mass hysteria. The state may convert into a global mass hysteria for an extended period of time. Recent developments in information technology, and particularly the use of social media, as well as a decline of religion, have made societies more prone to development of mass hysteria. Just cut the whole paragraph about religion just needs to fucking go, as well as references to it. Sanchez, Bailon, American identity, attacked American civil religion and trans-Western. Sanchez, Bailon, they keep fucking citing a priest too. This is bullshit. Unfortunately, once a mass hysteria takes hold of the government, the amount of damage the hysteria can inflict to life and liberty surges as the state's respect for private property and basic human rights is limited. The violation of basic human rights in the form of curfews, lockdowns, and coercive enclosure of business has been amply illustrated during the COVID-19 crisis. Naturally, the COVID-19 is an example indicative rather than representative, and its lessons cannot be generalized. During the COVID-19 crisis, several authors have argued that from a public health point of view, these invasive interventions such as lockdowns have been unnecessary and indeed detrimental to the overall public health. In fact, prior to scientific research on disease mitigation measures during a possible influenza pandemic had warned against such invasive interventions and recommended more normal social functioning. That's interesting. Moreover, in reaction to the past pandemics, such as the Asian flu of 1957 and 1958, there were no lockdowns. And research before 2020 had opposed lockdowns. Jansky, Gartz. From this perspective, the lockdowns have been a policy error. We have shown that these policy errors may well have been produced by collective hysteria. To which extent there has been a mass hysteria during the COVID-19 crisis is open for future research. In order to prevent the repetition of policy errors similar to those during the COVID-19 crisis, one should be aware of the political economy of mass hysteria developed in this article and the role of the state in fostering mass hysteria. Public health is likely to be affected negatively by state interventions during a mass hysteria due to policy errors. Done. Funding. No external funding. All right, this is a fucking Mises Institute article. And they somehow got it peer-reviewed and published to the NIH.
I don't know if it's Mises Institute. What I want to do is...
We're going all the way up to the top here. We're gonna
Philip Vegas. Philip Vegas definitely works for them. I don't know about Jose Antonio Pena Ramos or Antonio Sanchez Bayon.
Author information.
I mean, both of these guys are. One of these guys is from Chile. One of these guys is from Spain, and then Philip Vegas. I guess he lives in Spain too, or works in Spain. I don't know. But this is, I believe, this is out of Spain. This whole article is out of Spain.
Out of Switzerland.
But Philip Vegas writes for the Mises Institute. If you look him up,
Yeah. But, as is required under this Creative Commons license, we must give them credit. And so we are giving them credit under Creative Commons to use their content for this video. Thank you all for watching. Thank you all for fucking hanging out with us. That was a big fucking Jesus Christ. This article has been cited by others. Let's go down a rabbit hole.
I'm down.
This article has been cited in EU's ordering of COVID-19 vaccination doses, political decision-making under uncertainty by a bunch of Germans.
That's interesting.
I don't think we have 3 hours to translate a German article and go down that rabbit hole. But, no, I think I saw article notes. Received in December 2020, accepted in January 2021.
So yeah, all this is like I was saying. You know, those mortality rates or fatality rates. Those are all old data too. They're almost like a year old now.
Well,
which I believe has been revised down. Like it's a lower rate.
So, and here's the thing. This was first published in the International Journal of Environmental Research and Public Health. It's since been shared through the U.S. National Library of Medicine and the National Institutes of Health, which means it's received at least some level of peer review and scrutiny, because the most important part here is like, this is a .gov website, okay? Before you nuke me, Facebook, before you fact-check anything here, this is a .gov website. We are simply reading and reacting to information that the government has provided us, and the government and the NCBI has provided us. And people like talking about the fact checking and the fake news and the propaganda machines and the wars ready to go. Like, this would not be the first time. Like, this information is being published on a government platform. If it's not true, it's the government's fucking fault. I cited my source.
Or I said something inappropriate and questioned something in between, which is also probable.
No, I cited my source. This is the government. I'm making an appeal to authority. This is the government.
Yeah, no, if the government said it, it's true, which is the ultimate point that we should be hammering home here.
But it's just absolutely wild. It's absolutely wild to even think about that this article exists. And like until you sent it to me this morning, I'd heard nothing about it. And it really is just a logic-based breakdown of Rothbard and Mises and libertarian thought in response to pandemic and public health. Yeah. And it's not that absurd to react to things like this positively, with the exception of the religion argument. I'll leave that for another day.
Dude, but listen, let me ask you this. If there were more religious people, and by that measure, but by there being more religious people, more people resisted lockdowns, would you be happier? I feel like you don't. I feel like you personally, and I could be wrong.
I don't think more religious people
believes in God.
I don't believe more religious people would protest the lockdowns.
I don't know. Honestly, I don't know. I could see their case. That's all I'm saying. Like I'm not gonna shit on the assumption.
Yeah.
I definitely know like a lot of church going people were pissed off when they couldn't go to church.
Sure. When they couldn't go to church. And that'd be the only difference is the lockdown would say you still have to go to church. If it was religious people in charge and there was more religious people. If the majority voting base of this country was still extraordinarily religious, the lockdowns would have never gone after church. They would have carved out that exemption from the fucking get-go.
But I guess
no.
Yeah, all right.
Like if they never went after churches, the religious people never would have been up in arms.
I don't know. I don't know if that's the case. I don't want to get too far into that debate because there's variables and unknowns. I would think that if there was, in the absence of a state, the religious people would still be going to church unless they bought into hysteria. You know, it's like I don't think people are going to decide that the virus is more important than their religion unless somebody really sells them that hard. So but I don't know. Like that's now we're working in a different area where it's like that's in the absence of a state, nobody lives under that.
Right.
We're working strictly hypotheticals. So, and like I will say, surprising number of religious people did not fight the lockdowns. A surprising number of them, as much as like there were a lot of religious people who were upset. Like, my family's pretty religious. The most religious people in my families were like double and triple masking and stuff. It's like
it's crazy.
And not hanging out with anybody. They're probably like thanking the government for not allowing me to go to church. Like, thank you for not letting me pray with my people.
So that's one of my problems that I have with the Mises Institute. Not necessarily with Mises, because Mises never made the fucking argument. The Mises Institute, the Mises Caucus, paleo-conservatives and libertarians, paleo-libertarians in general, is like there seems to be a constant subconscious push within their ideology to like return to religious conservatism. Like it seems like if you argue with somebody from the Mises Institute or read enough coming out of the Mises Institute, inevitably they get back to losing religion was the reason. We need to get back to Christianity. It's all about Judeo-Christian morality to them. And to me, that's just not the basis of liberty. The basis of liberty is self-ownership, not a devotion to something greater than yourself. It's a devotion to yourself. And like, call me a Randian. I actually fucking hate Ayn Rand. I hate objectivism as a poorly formed philosophy. I debated Mark Pellegrino about it extensively, but to me, it's a much more clear and like road to liberty is objectivism than religious fundamentalism. And unfortunately, when it comes to right conservatives, right libertarians, paleo-conservatives, paleo-libertarians, especially coming out of the Mises Institute, and a lot of people in leadership positions and vocal positions within the Mises caucus of the Libertarian Party, there seems to be a subconscious push to what we need to do to fix everything is get back to religion. And it turns off way more people than it attracts. And if the Mises Institute would just drop that shit, if paleo-cons and paleo-libs would just drop the religious aspect from their rhetoric altogether, I think we'd see the liberty movement swell in numbers.
See, I see your point. I want to agree. I don't know if I agree or disagree. I haven't thought about this enough. It's like, to me, there's a comparison here to be drawn between woke libertarians, like social justice-y libertarians. And it's like the argument can be made, well, they're leaving that in there, they're putting that out there to attract those people, whether they believe it's the fundamental like reason or the fundamental crux of why we're not like living in a better culture, whatever it is. Like they put that out there to make that other side feel included. I do agree that at a certain point it becomes pandery. What I think that I want to make the argument, though I wouldn't expect everybody to agree with it. I want to make the argument that we should just bring in more people who are not. Listen, no, that's cool. I'm a Mises Caucus guy too. I wouldn't call myself a paleo libertarian or whatever. I don't know enough about paleo conservatism or whatever, but I would make the argument. That we need to bring in more people, just like the Mises Caucus takeover. Like if the Libertarian Party is too woke and social justice-y, then like let's take it over to people who are not. Or if the Mises Caucus or the Mises Institute is too religious-y, like let's take it over with more people who are not. You know what I'm saying? Like the idea is not to make them remove their stuff, but to get more people on board. Like maybe we need more messaging, and like that's cool.
You know what we need? What we need? We got the Dallas Accord of the Libertarian Party, where the Libertarian Party agrees to be specifically agnostic on whether or not the existence of the state is a positive thing, to welcome both minarchists, objectivists, voluntarists, and agorists, and anarchists
and
into
statists.
A broader liberty movement. Yeah, minarchists, they're statists. Maybe we need a Dallas Accord. Oh, what? Just it says, all right, you can be a fucking religious paleo lib, just don't fucking talk about it, asshole.
Yeah, but I'm not. That's another thing. Is like I'm not going to tell them not to talk about it. I think the only thing, it's like we have to. If
I think the argumentation detracts. The argumentation detracts because all they're doing is making an appeal to authority. The rest of that article, every last bit of that article, was an appeal to logic, an appeal to human nature, an appeal to history, and an appeal to perception of reality. The fucking chunk about religion was an appeal to authority. And to me, an appeal to authority is the antithesis of libertarianism.
I don't know that it's an appeal to authority as much as an appeal to faith, and faith has a profound effect on the psyche of the human species. It's like I'm not a person of faith, so I couldn't tell you exactly what that is, but I do know that people who believe live differently.
Hey, I'll be the militant atheist here. If you want to have a spiritual experience, do some DMT. Don't go to church. Your fucking pastor doesn't know what the fuck he's talking about. Human liberty is about individual self-ownership. And if you really want to free your mind and you want to fucking understand reality around you, just do some DMT.
And then look at something like this right behind me. Just like spend an hour looking at it.
You won't have to, man.
That's all. That's what the universe looks like when you're on that stuff.
Yeah. All right. Well, this has been a fun time. This has been a great read, review, and react. And I can't wait to see what we come up with next week and what the hell I'm going to react to next week and who's going to help do it. Bill, anything you want to leave people with as we're 2.5 hours in?
Sorry, I was late. Follow me on Twitter at Bill is a joke. Add me on Facebook, I guess, if you want. I'll accept any Facebook friend requests. Or if I don't, if I think you're a sketchball, I'll just make you follow me.
All right, everybody. Until next time, be free. Thanks again for tuning in and joining us tonight. Make sure you hit that like button and leave a comment below to let us know your thoughts. If you haven't subscribed, go ahead and hit that big red subscribe button on YouTube and turn on notifications to get alerted every time we go live. If you enjoyed this content, you can join our production team on Patreon by following the link in the description. And don't forget to follow on social media and join our community Discord channel by following the links in the description as well. The best part of all of this is the community that we're building and growing. So go ahead and join us. And thanks once again to our awesome sponsors and patrons for making all of this possible. And if you can't catch the show live, you can always catch it the next day on YouTube, Odyssey, Anchor, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, Breaker, and wherever else you listen to your favorite podcasts. So until next time, everybody, be free.